Soundbooth Theater presents Irrelevant Jack, written by Prax Venter, narrated by Justin Thomas James, featuring Jeff Hayes as Jack and Andrea Parsoneau as Lex, Raya, and the rest of the female cast. Chapter 1. Jack grabbed the chrome railing with a worn work glove and propelled himself up the short set of metal stairs to the foreman's trailer. The morning sun beat on the white-painted aluminum of the temporary structure, reflecting its brilliant light into his eyes. He rapped his knuckles against the door and let himself in. The smell of contained body odor and cool plastic enveloped him as he entered the shade of the trailer. With his hard hat in his hands, Jack put on his best fake smile and addressed a balding man typing information into a computer.
Matt, how's it going? You got a second?
The foreman continued to edit his spreadsheet as he mumbled a response.
Yeah, but don't sit down. I want to make this quick.
The sweaty man grabbed the mouse, clicked a few times, and then spun his chair.
Now, what was it you wanted, Jack? You've got 15 minutes before your survey team leaves.
Yes, sir. I'll get right to it. We both know it's time you assign me my own team. With more teams, we could map more tunnel per day, and we'd increase efficiency. I know the survey is behind schedule. Let me help us all make up lost time.
Jack was confident and focused. He needed to show his boss that he was indispensable. He wanted this. But the man in front of him was shaking his head in a way that indicated that he wasn't going to get it.
I'm just going to be blunt. You aren't ready to lead your own team.
Jack's smile fell off his face, and the foreman crossed his arms.
Do you know what makes a good team, Jack?
Good leader?
Good team members, Jack. Good team members. For a team to work right, everyone must be on the same page, all moving towards the same goal. You don't always do that. Stevens was in here not more than a week ago saying how you were off on your own again.
I found a nice fat deposit, Matt. Stevens might have missed it.
This whole survey would slow to a standstill if you went missing in there. Or worse. You know well and good you aren't supposed to wander off for any reason. You're, one more infraction from mandatory retraining classes? Jack, I like your enthusiasm and I acknowledge your good instincts, but you aren't ready to lead. See me in another 6 months.
Jack found himself standing out in the baking sunlight, staring at the gravel outside the foreman's trailer. Eventually, the shuffling feet of other surveyors on the dusty road to the main elevator shaft pulled him from his self-wallowing, and he joined the stream of his co-workers headed to another day of work. As soon as he entered the shadow of the massive canopy built over the tunnel entrance, Jack broke away from the crowd and headed over to his team's prep station. It was furnished with a folding table, some metal shelves stocked with supplies, and an outlet for recharging equipment, not to mention the all-essential coffee pot. Corey and Stevens were already there, and Jack saw his boss pouring out a cup as he walked up. Wordlessly, Stevens handed him the paper cup filled with coffee. Jack took it and promptly upended the steaming drink into his mouth. The bitter liquid was far too hot, and it hurt to drink, but he didn't care. It had been a rough month for Jack. He loved his job, but he seemed to have a hard time controlling himself when he got underground. There were riches to be found around every corner and twist of the dark caves. Of course, he didn't get to keep any of the silver they found in the caverns of this newly discovered unmapped silver mine, but he was thrilled to be all the way out in the middle of South America to explore its depths. Jack, Corey, and Stevens had been a team for almost 8 months, and they worked well together. As he looked up at the black stubbled face of Corey on the other side of the table, Jack caught him staring back with a goofy, lopsided grin.
I don't know how you guys drink coffee in this heat. It's like 1,000,000 degrees out here.
Corey's often-repeated coffee observation turned Jack's attention to the tall, sandy blonde man standing next to him, and he watched as Stevens dumped 5 packets of sugar into his cup. After a quick stir, their team leader took a gulp and let out a long "ah" as he gazed down lovingly at the sugary concoction in his hand.
Some of us need a boost in the morning, Stevens said. and a little extra focus never hurts."
The man flicked his steady blue eyes to Jack when he said that last part. It was obviously meant as a dig, but Jack just finished the gritty remnants of his coffee and started strapping on his climbing gear. Stevens was a good guy, and Jack knew he was only doing his job. Although he was strict, it was the team lead's responsibility if something happened to their crew. Jack honestly felt bad when he let the man down. Stevens and Corey finished checking their equipment as the three of them were called next for the elevator. After a 10-minute ride diagonally into the depths of the earth, the platform's hydraulic brakes screeched and stuttered as it slowed their descent. The cage opened and they stepped out into today's entry point, the Chapella East subsection. Headlamps came on as they prepared to delve into the specific area of unmapped darkness they had been assigned to survey, and Stevens turned to face his team.
"Stay within 15 feet at all times. We're headed down into E5G30. Map on X-coordinate sweeps."
The two men nodded in acknowledgement and started walking down one of the branching tunnels. It was slow work. They set up one TST imager and then set up another within line of sight of the first. The pair of equipment used radio waves and 360-degree thermal cameras to store a detailed 3D map of the cave system. As long as the imagers had an unobstructed view of each other, the team could leapfrog the equipment and track an unbroken path through the caves. The first hour was more exciting than most days, as the team needed to climb down a few decently difficult vertical shafts to get to where they needed to go. The survey equipment slowed the process down, but Jack enjoyed this part the most. Setting up the tripods in vertical positions could be tricky, and Jack kept in pretty good shape just by doing his job. The last few hours, however, had been a boring stretch of a slightly downward sloping tunnel. It was practically a straight line. All they did was pick up the equipment and move it over and over. While they waited for the scan to finish, Stevens was out scouting the possible branching paths for their next move. Jack called out to Corey standing by the imager ahead of him.
"Hey, this coffee wants out. I'm going over here,"
he said as he pointed down a path to his right. It would have taken too long to go back up for bathroom breaks, so they just relieved themselves in the cave.
"Yep,"
said Corey, waving him off with disinterest. Jack walked a few yards down an offshoot tunnel and found a small, shallow stream of water running over the rock. He passed his headlamp over a few colossal stalagmite formations looming up into the darkness as he searched for a good spot to relieve himself. He had his hand on his zipper when the light from his lamp reflected off something in the cave wall ahead of him. Jack instantly forgot about his biological need as he moved around the rocks to get a better look. The footing was tricky as the smooth stone under his boots was coated in the thinnest layer of running water, but he was determined to find the source of the glint. He had expected to find another vein of silver, but what Jack saw blew his mind. It was a doorway, a metal opening that led into pure darkness. Below it, a flat surface jutted out of the ground before the ominous passageway. Wires and tubes hung out from inside the jagged edges of metal as if a whole structure had been violently ripped away from somewhere. What was this? How did what appeared to be part of a modern submarine get down this far, lodged in rock? As there was nothing to see beyond the doorway, his ears strained to fill in the missing information. But all he could hear was the echoing drips of water in the cave behind him. Jack couldn't help himself, and he stepped inside. The space beyond the perfect rectangle opening was a stark contrast from the rocky walls of narrow cave systems. The open area was a void of darkness in every direction. His head slowly swiveled around the cavernous chamber, trying to light it up, but most of the walls were beyond the reach of his headlamp. He saw large square containers and metal debris strewn everywhere, and the place gave him the impression of a long-abandoned factory. The whole interior was slanted downward slightly and covered in sludge. He had to watch his footing so as not to slide further into this bizarre, unknown place. A torn piece of metal on the ground nearby with some markings caught his eye, and Jack moved a few steps deeper into the mysterious underground vault to check it out. He squatted down, wiping the dirt off with his glove, and his headlamp lit up symbols he had never seen before.
"Come in, Jack!"
Stevens demanded loudly through the radio attached to Jack's shoulder. Directly after his team leader spoke, the ground began to shake violently. Jack slipped backward onto the flat metal floor and rolled over, instinctively putting his hands over his head. After the initial shock, he aimed his light at the door just in time to see it slowly sliding closed. Jack scrambled off the ground to reach it, but it was already too late. He watched as a plume of dust swirled in the beam of his headlamp as the wall sealed shut in front of him. Chapter 2. Jack pounded on the door, screaming at the top of his lungs to let Stevens and Corey know where he was and that he was alive. That is, if they were also alive. He could tell from the dust pouring in before the door closed that a part of the cave outside had come down too. There might be yards of rock between him and his team. Maybe more. The radio was unresponsive, and he could hear nothing on any channel. He pounded his fist against the door again. The metal was so thick that his most powerful strike only created a small and ineffective thud. Jack eventually gave up and sat with his back against the door, listening for any signs of activity in the cave. He heard nothing but silence. While he was sitting there, he came to the conclusion that this definitely had to be aliens. His flashlight revealed more of the strange writing on the walls, and the smooth glass panels embedded in the walls looked positively futuristic, not to mention the door sealing him in automatically. With all the advanced-looking technology around him, he figured he was inside of an abandoned spaceship, somehow buried a mile below the surface of the Earth. Maybe it was these guys who built the pyramids. He wondered if finding this ancient alien ship would make up for how much trouble he was in. Survey protocol dictated that employees needed to stay put and wait for rescue in the event of a cave-in. After 20 minutes passed, Jack could not sit and wait any longer. There was a chance that another part of this place was exposed to open tunnels, and he had to find his way out before his flashlight and headlamp ran out of power. That, and he needed to see more of this place. He tried to open a few of the 4-foot square containers with one of the hammer picks he normally used for spelunking, but neither prying nor smashing worked. Leaving the mysterious alien boxed goods alone, Jack walked the edges of the mostly empty chamber. He only saw one open doorway and 3 others that were sealed shut. Ready to leave what he thought of as the cargo bay, he exited through the only open door. Jack passed more sealed doors to either side and eventually came to an intersection. He could go right or left. He was about to choose right when a white light mounted on the ceiling bathed the corridor to his left in a soft glow. He wondered if this was a coincidence, just a short in some wires after the door closed. A flurry of questions spun through Jack's mind as he stood in front of the steady light illuminating the sleek, futuristic corridor ahead of him.
Hello? Is anyone there?
Jack asked, raising his eyes up to the ceiling. Nothing. Maybe they didn't speak his language. At least whatever this place was still had power, and that gave him a bit of hope, but also made him feel much more uneasy about the situation. He had seen plenty of Sunday afternoon alien action movies where bloodthirsty space monsters or deadly robots stalked the unwitting hero from the shadows. Jack shined his flashlight down the other option, looking for a reason to explore the darkness in that direction. After some contemplation, he let go of his mounting paranoia and figured there was probably a motion sensor or something in the floor that triggered the light. Making his choice, he followed the light and turned left. He passed more closed doors and intersections with collapsed ceilings before the passage widened out to a hallway that seemed built to handle heavier foot traffic. There were benches and planters filled with dust symmetrically placed along the walls, and the passage reminded him of something out of a large school or hospital. As he came to another intersection, a larger door opened directly in front of him, letting out a brief hiss of air. To either side of him, the metallic walls and reflective panels continued straight as far as his flashlight could shine, leaving only untouched darkness beyond. He turned his light forward into the newly opened path and noticed that it was another large space like the cargo bay he had seen before.
Are you leading me somewhere?
Jack asked anyone that might be listening. Again, no one answered. With a shrug, he took the invitation and stepped through the door. Once inside, his flashlight passed over upended tables and chairs, and his brain had a moment to register the term cafeteria before the door quickly slid closed behind him. It became undeniable that someone was directing him somewhere, and the flesh on his arms tightened as goosebumps spread over them. He was getting a seriously bad vibe from this abandoned alien spaceship. Jack turned from the door and searched around slowly, the light from his flashlight drifting over piles of upended furniture. Despite all the tables and chairs bunched up in one corner, this was clearly a cafeteria or lunchroom. There was very little dust in here, and everything in the room had a too smooth feel to it. Jack pondered if these ancient aliens looked human, but his thoughts were scattered when a bright light filled his vision. Softly glowing white rectangles were evenly spaced around the cafeteria, saturating every surface with illumination. With the area now lit up, Jack turned off his flashlight and let his eyes adjust while he got his bearings.
Hello?
He tried again. Turning in place, he saw windows along one of the walls with solid rock pressing in on them from the other side, and in the middle of the room stood a counter with recessed metal tubs individually formed into its surface. There was still no answer. Jack moved toward the center of the room with his flashlight held out, ready to be used as a club. He wasn't sure what he expected to hit with it, but he just knew some horrible alien monster with dripping jaws was lurking somewhere. He slowly approached what could only be an empty buffet. There was a sneeze guard and everything. Jack's mind slipped its gears as his working description of what was going on switched from aliens to time travel. After searching the room and finding nothing interesting besides futuristically styled furniture, he decided to move forward. There was only one open door out of this room, and as he walked through, it slammed closed behind him, drenching him in darkness again. The doors seemed to be closing faster the deeper he went. With a sigh, he thumbed the button on his flashlight and pushed forward into the dark corridor in front of him. Jack eventually came to a section of the hallway that was missing a large portion of the metal flooring, and below him was a very long drop. He could see a cross-section of floor upon floor below him, and they continued downward as far as his light could shine. He was used to spelunking in caves, so Jack didn't hesitate as he climbed along the exposed circuits and tubing in the damaged wall, moving horizontally. A feeling of undeniable wrongness washed over him the moment he set his boots down on the other side, but Jack shook his head and chalked it up to an insane situation. Exploring this eerie and unexplainable structure had been exciting, but now it was time to find an exit. Stumbling around in these abandoned passageways when his batteries for his flashlight ran out was not really something he wanted to think about. There was a new dark purplish haze in the air, and it grew in density as he walked. And as Jack crept deeper into the immense underground structure, the uneasy feeling worming in his stomach increased. He stepped around a tangle of exposed wires hanging from the ceiling like a dead robot octopus and entered an area that had to be an engine room. Large machines loomed in the darkness, and Jack had never seen anything as complex. He approached the side of an enormous turbine-like component and stopped short when he saw movement crawling over its surface. Jack focused the light to get a better look and saw what appeared to be a slimy black string with a faint purple glow. It made sickly slurping noises as the whole mass slowly writhed, and bile rose to the back of Jack's throat. He backed away from the infested machine, his eyes wide.
The hell is this?
He muttered. A persistent itch under Jack's glove that he'd been ignoring jumped to the front of his mind, and he pulled it off, tucking it under his arm. He held his hand up to the light, and there on his palm, he saw the same pulsing substance. Panicking, he tossed his glove away and tried to frantically wipe his hand off on his pants. The stuff didn't come off, and he looked closer to see that the disgusting substance was squirming through the flesh on his hand. Jack could feel it writhing inside him. He needed to find a way out, now. Staying as far as he could from the walls, Jack found an open door and ran through it into another long hallway. The sheer immensity of this structure he was trapped inside finally became real, and he was losing any hope of surviving this. The door closed behind him as soon as he was through, and he discovered that the dark haze was much thicker on this side. Up ahead, he could see another door opening for him, beckoning him forward. Light spilled out into the dim hallway, and he could barely make out the purple-black tendrils worming into every surface ahead of him. Jack began to dry heave, his stomach constricting with terrible nausea. A primal, unstoppable panic began rising inside him, and just when he was about to snap, he heard something new. A faint melody floated to his ears, and it was coming from above. He shone his light over his head and saw a damaged section in the ceiling of the corridor. There was a hole torn into the structure that he might be able to fit through and into what looked like an exposed ventilation shaft. He moved near the wall and strained his ears, trying to pick up the sound again. There it was. The wisp of someone singing from many floors up came echoing down to him. Jack's fear-soaked mind latched onto the faint music, and he resolved to find it at all costs. Ignoring the open door ahead and the sickness he could feel spreading through his body, he started to climb the wall to get up into the shaft. He did his best not to touch the vile stuff pulsating through the hallway and used his climbing gear as much as he could, but he knew the precaution was pointless. It was already inside him. Then the open door at the far end of the hall started to open and close slowly. Jack paused. He had never seen them do that. He watched it move up and down as its rhythmic percussion echoed down the hall like a metronome. He shook his head. He wasn't going that way. He needed to go up. Jack needed to find that music. He gradually made his way up the vertical shaft, and as he climbed higher and higher, the music slowly grew louder and louder. It was clearly a woman's voice woven into the faint melody. Jack found some solid footing in the twisted metal and held still for a moment, listening. But he couldn't quite hear what she was saying.
"Hello?"
He called out and waited. There was no change in the music, and he was getting the feeling that this was a recording set to play on a loop. He resumed his climb upwards through the damaged shaft. Jack noticed that as the music grew louder, the nauseating haze grew thinner. It felt like a good sign, and some of the panic in his mind began to unwind. That was until he caught a glimpse of his hand and saw that the tendrils had wormed their way up his forearm. Clenching his teeth in disgust, he turned his attention back to scaling the vertical shaft. All he could do was climb and hope that whoever or whatever was playing the music had answers. The hole eventually came out onto another damaged corridor like the many others he had seen before. Jack clambered over the edge and laid on his back a moment to rest. He must have climbed up over 20 floors. The air was totally clear, and there was none of that horrible feeling that permeated everything below. He got to his feet and noticed a growing numbness in his infected hand. Jack shook it out with a grimace, trying to ignore it as he moved down the corridor towards the location of the music. A hissing noise pulled his attention to a door sliding up into the ceiling to his right. He paused and shined his flashlight into the newly opened room. His circular spot of illumination passed over piles of broken furniture and clothes, and it looked as if a bedroom had been run through the tumble cycle in a dryer. The music was not coming from in there. Jack stuck to the plan to ignore any more attempts to lead him away from it and turned away from the trashed bedroom. Before he could take 2 steps down the hallway, the door slammed shut. The force of it sent a wave of unease through him. He paused, and the door opened again and slammed shut one more time.
Getting angry, are we?
Jack asked the ceiling. He took another confident step forward, and then all the doors in the hallway opened and slammed shut with a concussive force. They were like chomping teeth to either side of him, and the display of deafening rage was utterly terrifying. He put one foot in front of the other and crept forward through the middle of the corridor. Toward the end, he came face to face with a junction where a thick bulkhead was repeatedly slamming onto a bent support beam. Whoever was leading him away from the music was attempting to seal off the corridor. The force of the impact was sending sparks onto the floor as steel rhythmically rammed against steel. Jack got on his back and shimmied under the twisted debris, wincing as burning bits of metal fell on him from above. The beam held, and he made it through. As soon as he stood up on the other side, the door slid to a stop. The singing was now loud enough to hear clearly, and it was a lullaby he had never heard.
Fall deep, my dear, and I shall catch you. Asleep, my love, and I shall watch you. Rest your head upon your bed. The stars above can see you. Untie your knot and worry not. Let the weariness defeat you.
There were more verses, but it was all the same kind of nonsense you sing to a child to get them to sleep. It repeated as soon as the song ended. Jack could not fathom what was going on. Why was this music in English? Why was this place trying to kill him? What was growing on him? Again, moving forward was his only option. He willed his feet to carry him toward the source of the music. Jack knew he was close now, and even the doors had given up their attempts to lead him away. This new area appeared to be a vast shopping mall. He followed the sound across more damaged sections of floor to a large archway with colorful symbols he couldn't read. He entered a waiting room with chairs lining the walls, but like everywhere else, the place was empty. Maybe this was some type of urgent care? He took a deep breath and followed the music coming from another narrow hallway that was behind the reception desk. It was much louder than it had ever been, and Jack knew he'd arrived. After the tight hallway, he emerged in a brightly lit area full of wall-to-wall circuit boards and wires. It was as if a computer had thrown up all over the place. Jack noticed a speaker in the wall, and he had finally found where the music was coming from. It shut off the second he walked in.
Great. Led by the nose again,
he said, looking around.
Now
He stopped short when a beam of light emerged from a point in the ceiling and started to sweep over his body. It focused on his infected hand, and he felt compelled to stand perfectly still. Maybe this thing would fix him? Maybe save him? After it had enough of his hand, the glittering beam of light moved up his chest to his head. Jack felt a slight tickle between his ears and a humming that was getting too much to handle. He was about to step back out of the light when it abruptly shut off. There was some commotion under the floor, and then a small panel slid open, revealing more machinery below. An object rose out of the opening that looked like an exit sign over a handprint scanner. Jack had to look twice. It was an exit sign that you would see hanging from the ceiling of an apartment complex, showing you where the stairwell was, and its contrast to the surrounding futuristic technology was stark. The object emerging out of the floor came to a stop, and the hand-scanning panel jutting out from below the sign started flashing. Jack looked down at his hand covered in pulsing tendrils as they wove themselves around his veins. He realized he didn't really have a choice. He wasn't about to just walk out and not put his hand on the offered exit sign. He reached out his good, uninfected hand and pressed it on the panel. A jolt went up his arm to his brain, and then there was an abrupt, crisp blackness. Chapter 3. He found himself floating in a sea of static. In every direction there was nothing but a burning blaze of vibrating white electricity. His mind spun as his eyes clawed around for any hint of sanity. He found absolute nothingness. He had no body, no hands, no feet. Nothing. The white noise he existed in was everything, even himself. He remained in this state for what felt like years, but he wasn't sure. It was as if parts of his mind were being shuffled like a deck of cards, and keeping a constant train of thought was like trying to hold on to smoke. 2 flashes of black void caught his attention. The uniquely empty holes in the infinite fizzing nothing were zooming towards him at high speed, and he couldn't tell if he was moving or if the 2 distant points were coming toward him. When he arrived, his infinite perspective settled into the holes, and the universe wrapped around his mind, containing it inside a spherical shell. He looked down and found his hands. How long had it been since he felt anything? He didn't know. Then he was falling, as if he were a calmly drifting leaf discovering a waterfall. Soft starbursts of vivid color flowed all around him as he plummeted. He glanced upward and noticed a universe of glittering pinpoints falling away from him. As he lazily watched the cosmos far above, a bright orb of light detached itself from the others and spiraled downward. The unique instance of light came straight toward him and was catching up quickly. Until now, he was okay with the gentle, leisurely descent, but something about the way this light was sputtering out bits of itself and erratically moving gave him an uneasy feeling. The light slammed into his chest and it spread itself deep into the center of his being. It started to spin around inside of his new body, and he felt his heart race along with its movements. He took a moment to be surprised that he had a heart again. Was he dead? Had he died somehow? He couldn't remember. The light inside him slowed its frantic movements, and so did the pounding in his veins. The euphoria that began to wash over him was like the best runner's high ever. He closed his eyes and focused on the strange sensation billowing through his body. There was a sense of expansion. It felt like he was more somehow. A tingle around his midsection prompted him to open his eyes and look down at himself. He was naked, except for a leather belt. Connected to the belt on his left side was a long, thin leather container, flapping against his arm as he fell. It took him a handful of heartbeats, but he recognized the object as a scabbard. He had played Dungeons & Dragons enough times at Sean's house as a kid to know what a scabbard was. Sean always spilled something on the precious papers and maps they had spread over his parents' dining room table. Usually it was some kind of juice. It was hilarious. Were these memories? Yes. His name was Jack. He remembered everything. As soon as he remembered who he was, the air changed and he was yanked in a new direction. Jack saw a wooden door slam closed in front of him, and the infinite expanse of the universe he was drifting through was cut off. This strange new vision of a door was interrupted when he hit the ground and started to slide. Rough edges tore up the flesh on his back until his body slowed to a stop. Thick, icy raindrops splattered against his naked skin, and his head throbbed like his brain was too big for his skull. Combined with lacerations, Jack was experiencing the worst pain he had ever felt. He laid where he landed, motionless, blinking up into the rain. He tried to figure out what was happening to him, but between the explosives in his head and the stinging, ripped flesh on the back half of his body, he was having a hard time focusing. In fact, Jack thought it was a much better idea to take a little nap instead of dealing with any of this. His eyelids grew heavy and were in the process of surrendering to the darkness that wanted to obscure all sights and thoughts, when he noticed a woman with dripping wet hair was looking down on him. Jack tried to reach out to the woman, just as her terrified face and an impossible tower behind her were both illuminated by a flash of lightning. The sight was almost enough to keep his vision from retreating to pinpoints, but the argument coming from the back of his head was too convincing to ignore, and Jack's mind folded into unconsciousness. Chapter 4.
Rest your head upon your bed, the stars above can see you.
It was a woman's voice. The same words, but a different woman. Someone nearby singing the same song that echoed in the abandoned, infested metal nightmare. Jack became fully alert and awake, but he was too afraid to open his eyes. He tried to remain motionless as his mind raced. It was raining outside, windy. He was lying down on something soft, a bed. There was a flickering heat by his head that must have been a fire. He felt warm. Also, he felt no pain. He could have sworn he lost a lot of skin out there. While he was on that subject, where was here?
He's awake.
A gravelly-voiced man in the room called attention to Jack's failed attempt at feigned unconsciousness. He kept his eyes closed anyway. Panic was raising inside him once again. Then she spoke.
Jack, I'm Lex, and this is my father, Herrick. I found you after... you entered through the door. You're safe now.
She knew his name. He slowly opened his eyes. The singing woman was sitting on a stool near him, and an old man, her father, was standing across the room with his back leaning against a stone wall. They were all inside a dimly lit stone cottage. Jack sat up to greet them and realized he was still naked. He peeked under the covers and confirmed the existence of his body. After the last few hours, he wasn't sure of anything. However, he did find the odd leather belt and scabbard were still around his waist. Had he been rescued from a cave-in? Had he hit his head and the whole abandoned spaceship adventure been a dream? Then why did he still have this weird belt? The scene before him looked more like he was rescued by Vikings. The man near the back of the room, Herrick, she said, was dressed in slabs of roughed-up leather armor. He had a massive gray beard and oozed scrutiny, staring at Jack over a glowing pipe held in his teeth. Lex was a pleasant contrast. Her blonde hair drank in the firelight, and her large eyes seemed genuinely happy to see him. She just sang the same lullaby as the voice being broadcast throughout the abandoned hallways, and he wondered if she had been the one to lead him here.
Where am I?
Was the first question to make it out of Jack's mouth. Her lips pressed into a tentative smile.
Let me be the first to welcome you to Blackmoor Cove. We weren't expecting someone new at our current town level. We have so many questions for you.
The look of hope in her bright golden eyes made him a little nervous. And what was this about a town level? The storm picked up as the wind howled around and even through the stones in the wall next to him. What seemed like a lifetime ago, he had been surveying a cave system for precious metals 50 miles north of the Sierra Madre. By the way the air smelled, he now had to be near an ocean.
I have a few of my own,
Jack said, wondering where on earth Blackmoor Cove was.
How do you know my name? How did I get here? And where are my clothes?
Her eyebrows furrowed slightly.
Your name? I just inspected you.
She paused as if that was enough.
And as to how you got here was a question we had for you. I saw the tower door open. something that has never happened, then you were tossed out, as you are now, and it wasn't even at exit."
What she said wasn't making any sense, but her voice held a quiet reverence. Jack was thinking how none of his questions were really getting answered when Harek snorted and rolled his eyes. Lex turned to face the bearded man behind her.
"Why would I lie to you?"
Harek shook his head and looked away, sucking his pipe and blowing out a plume of smoke. Jack decided to just lay his cards on the table.
Look, I was underground surveying for the Max Pass Mining Company. There was a cave-in, and then I was in an ancient alien futuristic spaceship with some kind of crawling purple disease where I followed a recording of someone else singing that lullaby you were singing a moment ago. About the stars seeing me. A massive computer showed me an exit sign. I touched the panel and ended up naked, shredding my ass raw on the rocks outside. Obviously, I've had some sort of brain trauma.
He paused to take a breath.
Now, why am I in this stone cabin and not in a hospital somewhere?
Mild concern replaced the hope he'd seen in Lex's eyes.
"Jack, most of what you just said was gibberish. You must have really hit your head out there. But you spoke about the song I was singing. Did you hear someone singing those words in the tower?"
Her darker eyebrows sprang back to hopeful, and Harek had suddenly found Jack very interesting again.
It was coming from a machine. It was a recording, repeating over and over. I was infected. It was all over my hand and crawling up my arm. It felt like I was being consumed.
Jack looked down at his hand. All signs of the tainted, pulsating mess were gone.
I thought I was going to die. Maybe I did. That voice saved me, I think. Following it led me here.
Jack gestured around the small stone cottage, and he noticed Lex staring at him, wide-eyed.
"She led you here? She?"
Harek ripped the pipe out of his mouth and walked a few steps forward.
"It can't be her, Lex."
The blonde woman flinched as he continued to hurl his words back at her.
"She's gone. We have enough problems without some madman stirring up old ones."
Harek's face was wild with rage as he gestured at Jack. Lex didn't move, yet she seemed to grow smaller, her gaze locked down at the floor. Harek's smoldering eyes snapped to Jack's, making him very uncomfortable. He was essentially naked under a cloth blanket, and if this bearded lunatic was going to start getting aggressive, Jack had only his fists.
"Okay, hero,"
Harek began, the word dripping with sarcasm.
"Care to explain your class, or that damned empty sword belt in your main hand equipment slot?"
Harek stepped into the firelight, and Jack could see him a lot better. He was older than Jack had thought, but he was also a lot bigger, especially in the arm area. His arms were large, but his hands were huge. One of them was clenched tightly, and the other was pointing at Jack.
Hey, I'll answer anything you want, but I'm no hero. I just want to figure out what is going on here.
"You have a hero class!"
Harek yelled the words slowly. The man looked down at his daughter.
"While irrelevant is becoming more self-explanatory the more he speaks."
He looked back at Jack with a sneer.
"A decorative item in your weapon slot is beyond ridiculous. It's suspicious, is what it is."
Weapon slot?
Jack mumbled, confused.
This scabbard?
He pulled out the length of leather from under the blanket, careful not to flash his genitals at Lex. Jack noticed she was looking at him again. He was lost for a moment when their eyes locked. Perhaps it was the soft fireplace lighting or the intensity of the insane situation he found himself in, but he just now saw how stunning she was. Her sad golden eyes drew him in, and Jack decided then and there that he didn't like seeing her unhappy.
"How can you not know?"
she asked, pleading. They all waited for Jack to explain himself. He became more uncomfortable as the silence grew. He had no idea how to respond. Herrick had had enough and turned to leave, but paused when he got to the door.
Decide if he is a curse to us or not, but I am done here. I do not trust anything that comes out before ever going in.
And then he was out in the rain, the wooden door clattering shut behind him. The storm outside was howling, but the silence in the cabin was deafening. Lex was looking at the floor between her elbows, resting on her knees. Strands of her golden hair were loosely hanging down with a bit of her ears peeking out. They were pointed and longer than would be considered normal. They looked perfect. He couldn't take his eyes off of her. After the silence became too much to bear, she pushed her arms off her legs and stood in one fluid motion, heading for the door.
Wait!
Jack called. She stopped and looked back at him. The light was gone out of her eyes, and she looked like a completely different person.
I really want to answer your questions, and I still have so many of my own. Please, don't leave me here.
Jack thought he was slipping into madness and needed to have another person around right now. He saw Lex drop some of the tension she was holding and let out a sigh. She considered his words, her eyes lingering on him, then seemed to come to a decision. The golden-eyed woman walked away from the door, but not towards the bedside stool. She went to a wooden set of drawers on one of the walls and touched it. She seemed to be blankly staring into space for a moment, and then came back towards Jack. She was wearing a cloak over something bulky, like a bulletproof vest. Below the bottom of the cloak, he could see that she wore black leather boots. Jack started to wonder if he had gone back in time. He had been in a buried ancient futuristic structure and touched something that sent him through some crazy mind-altering journey. Maybe he got sent to the past? Lex stood next to his bed and held out her empty hand.
Here, put these on.
Jack had a fraction of a second to be confused before a black panel grew to fill half of his vision. He flinched, uselessly waving his hands in front of his face. It even remained if he blinked his eyes. He thought he was having a stroke. Words and images appeared on the flat surface floating before him. It looked like a black lacquered panel made of wood with ornate filigree embellishments interlaced over its surface. The words, "Trade offered, Lex," were written at the top, carved directly into the wood, and the letters were painted with pure white paint. The panel was divided into two sections. On one side was "Offered by Lex," and on the other was "Offered by Jack." On Lex's side were painted images of two objects, a shirt and a pair of pants. Jack's side was empty. Two beveled buttons were jutting out of the panel at the bottom labeled "Accept" and "Decline," made from cut gemstones. Jack knew what this was. A lot of the confusing things these people were saying were starting to make sense. Jack smiled and reached out to touch the trade interface in front of him, but it was like trying to touch a movie theater screen from the 5th row. Behind the menu, Jack could see that Lex was concerned by his actions. She noticed him look at her.
Are you going to accept? You can stay naked for all I care.
I've never seen anything like this. How do I...
He reached out and tried to touch accept. The button flashed, and all the colors on the panel inverted for a second, then the whole menu faded away. Lex walked away from him and over to a chair on the other side of a wooden table. She crossed her arms and sat looking at him, expectantly.
So, this is a game? Some kind of virtual world?
Jack asked, searching the blankets around him for the clothes from the trade. As an experienced player of pen and paper role-playing games, he was easily seduced by a few digital ones when he was younger. That was before he decided to get away from everything he knew to explore caves and strange lands for real.
This is no game,
she said, squinting her eyes.
And if you talk like this, it will be you leaving very shortly afterward.
She paused to make sure Jack understood.
When I saw you appear, I was filled with hope. There isn't supposed to be anyone new, much less someone with a hero class. Even if yours is bizarre. even if your brains are jelly and you don't know how the world works, this town is so far gone that you are an impossibility. We asked for help that we knew was never going to come, and then here you are."
Jack stopped searching for the items and looked up into her shadowed eyes.
"But you can barely seem to help yourself,"
she finished, shaking her head slowly.
Hey, I am a pretty fast learner, and I am highly motivated to figure out what the hell is going on. The things you think I should know? Just humor me. How do I find those items you gave me and put them on?
"Fine. Open your inventory and move them into your equipment slots."
How do I actually do that? Open my inventory,
he repeated.
"I don't know. Explain how you actually move your arms."
Jack looked down and wondered briefly if all he had to do was think about, and there it was. Another black lacquer panel filled his vision. The inventory panel was mostly an empty grid, but in the upper left corner were miniature versions of a pair of pants and a shirt. He looked around the menu, taking in all the detail. It was beautifully crafted. Jack's eye was pulled to some other stats in the upper right corner. Coins, 0. Free slots, minus 2,147,483,648 out of 16. That last one was odd, but Jack quickly shook off the confusion. He was determined to dress himself. Reaching out with his hand, he found the floating interface menu reacted quickly to his slightest intentions. He thought he'd like to see his equipment slots, and the instant he did, images and information on the black panel shifted to display his character menu as well. There were a lot of details to process here. In the center, he recognized the familiar layout of empty boxes clustered around a representation of himself.
Equipment slots,
Jack whispered to himself. The character displayed on this panel was like looking at a 3D recording of him waiting in line at the bank. The tiny version of Jack stood naked except for the leather belt and empty scabbard hanging from his left hip. He wondered if his body in this virtual world was identical to his own. It more or less looked like him. Short, jet-black hair, fit build, junk in the right places. His work had made his skin tight and his muscles toned. After giving this smaller representation of this new virtual body a once-over, he was more or less happy with what was there. He wondered what was happening to his real body and how to get back to it. Jack's eyes bounced around to the other parts of the menu. The equipment slots were all labeled and empty except one. The one labeled Main Hand was currently filled with a miniature replica of the belt and scabbard around the waist. Jack remembered what Herrick had said about having it equipped there. He'd have to come back to that later. He looked over to the other side of the menu where his inventory was. He focused his attention on the image of the pants and was only slightly surprised when a smaller black wooden panel emerged on top. Common cloth pants, legs, value 1. He indicated that he wanted to move them to his legs equipment slot, and they instantly faded from his inventory and reappeared in the intended empty box. The smaller representation of himself standing in the middle of his character screen, looking bored, suddenly had a pair of white cloth pants on under his belt. Jack wanted the menus out of his face for a moment, and they faded from view quickly. A smile spread across his face as his brain rewarded him with a spark of a natural high for discovering how easy it was to control the menus. Peeking under the sheets, Jack saw that he indeed had the white pants covering his lower half. He hadn't even really felt them slip themselves on while he was sitting up in the bed, but there they were. They were a little rough, but they got the job done. He opened both menus again and focused on the shirt Lex had given him. Common cloth shirt, chest, value 1. Jack moved the item over to his free chest slot, and then it was on him.
This is amazing,
he mumbled under his breath. He dismissed his inventory information and focused on his character menu. The first thing to catch his attention was the text carved into the top. Jack, Hero Class, irrelevant.
Irrelevant?
He asked as he looked over to Lex. The look in her eye implied she had been watching him the whole time. The blonde woman took a deep breath before she spoke.
My father knows much about the heroes of our world, because he's worked with a countless many. He was a great leader. I trust in his wisdom when he says he has never heard of a class like yours. It doesn't sound like a good one, does it? You asked me to play along and teach you how to use your menus. And sitting here, watching you learn to equip items, makes me believe that you truly are in need of help. But I need to know if you have the possibility of being any help to us. I don't suppose you know what your combat role is, do you?
She asked, a dark eyebrow raised. Jack pulled the cloth sheet off him, spun, and put his feet on the floor. The stones were warm on his skin from the fire. He didn't know what being any help meant, and had a bad feeling about it being directly related to a combat role. If this really was some hyper-advanced virtual video game, was there respawning if he got killed? Jack was going to add that to his growing list of questions when he remembered the way both Lex and her father responded about someone being gone when he mentioned the singing that led him through the ship. He decided to put that one off for a while. Yet, if he wanted to get out of here, he needed to know more about everything. And if this were a game, it would probably be wise to learn the rules. Even as he insisted to himself that he wanted to get back home and out of whatever this was, there was a small part of him that wanted to help Lex in any way he could.
How do I find out what my combat role is?
Open your path menu like you did your inventory. There you will find your class path. More than one, if you're lucky. And underneath each one of those, you'll see a specific skill or ability. Take a look, and let's hear what an irrelevant can do,
she said, her lips pulled into a tight smile. He gave her a nod and thought about wanting to see his path menu. A black panel appeared before him with new information. His class was displayed at the top. Below that, a lot of text was carved into the panel, and it was pretty much as she described. Path, Dimensional Blade, 1. Double Strike, activated, 5 mana, main hand damage ×2. Your blade becomes a blur, attacking the target twice in a single moment. Path, Data Mining, 1. Mining Laser, channeled, 2 mana per second, main hand damage per second. Skill. Repeating, rewrite _version 1.58, include, error. Correction, target, total, local _user, unif. Jack was pretty much getting the idea until he got to the data mining path. He was very much in a virtual game that had combat skills, and that game seemed to be malfunctioning. He was no computer programmer, but he knew enough to know code looked something like this. He became aware of the faintest gnawing sensation in the back of his mind, and the strong urge to wake up from this dream rose up from within him. Jack's mind raced and quickly settled on a solution. He tried to pull up a log out menu. When that didn't work, he tried to think of different variations. Exit, quit, system menu.
What do you see?
Lex insisted, snapping Jack out of his panic. He took a moment to clear his head. There was no immediate danger, that he could tell, sitting here with Lex in this stone cabin. He told himself that he needed to stop freaking out about everything.
The first section is Dimensional Blade. There is a number 1 next to it.
Everyone starts at Tier 1.
She dismissed the concept with a wave of her hand and sat forward.
Dimensional Blade. Okay, that sounds better. Normal, but I haven't heard of it. Does its first skill deal damage?
Yeah.
Jack smiled.
The skill under it says I can do something called Double Strike.
As soon as he thought of the skill, Jack suddenly felt the room spin and put a hand to his head. A tiny panel popped up in the corner of his vision that had bright red text carved across it. Ability cannot be used now. Wrong weapon type equipped.
Did you just try and use your skill on me?
Lex asked, leaning back.
No, I didn't try to,
he said, dismissing the alert message in case she might somehow see it floating right next to her. Jack was thankful that the discordant feeling passed quickly.
You are something very unusual, Jack,
Lex said, appraising him. After a moment, she leaned forward again.
Watching you learn all the things people are born knowing sure is interesting. I haven't seen anything interesting in a long time. Also, Dimensional Blade must be a damage-centric path. You might be useful after all. Now, carefully tell me the details of the skill, please.
Well, it's activated. It costs 5 mana, and it deals main hand damage times 2. So, that means I do double damage with this, right?
It means that you need to take a look at that oddity you currently have equipped in your main hand equipment slot. If that floppy leather thing dangling from your hip has a damage value, I would question my own sanity. I honestly don't know what to expect.
Jack called up his character screen again. It was filled with information he needed to understand. The scabbard was why he had brought up the menu, though, so he focused on what was equipped in his main hand slot. ARV Alternus. Decorative belt, value 0 out of 10. Damage, missing va... He looked up at Lex and looked back down at the item. Whatever this thing was, it didn't seem to do any damage. Guessing that he couldn't use any of his abilities with it on, Jack decided to tuck the strange object safely away in his inventory. He called up his inventory, and the panel rearranged itself to accommodate both menus. As he had done with the clothes, he willed the scabbard to move from the equipment slot to his inventory. It didn't budge. A smaller panel appeared, hovering above his menus. You cannot remove this item. Please increase complexity, S% parenthesis null parenthesis for more options.
Lex?
He asked, looking up at her, and he could tell she was growing impatient.
What does it say, Jack?
How do I increase complexity?
I don't know what that means. Like most of what you say.
She rubbed a finger into her temple before continuing.
It doesn't do damage, does it?
It wasn't a question.
No, not really. I don't think it does. And...
He looked back down at the character menu, still open. He tried as hard as he could, but Jack could not will the item into his inventory.
It doesn't look like I can take it off.
What do you mean? Are you saying you can't unequip it?
She bent forward, put her elbow on her knee, and rested her forehead on her hand.
Why am I still surprised?
After a moment, Lex straightened and looked at him again. Jack was beginning to feel a slight tingle in his gut every time she cast her large golden eyes in his direction.
You said the blade skill was the first one. You have a split path?
She asked, hopeful again.
Yeah,
he said, opening his skills menu.
The other path is called data mining.
He wasn't even going to mention the description. He wanted to focus on the positive. She didn't look impressed.
What? Mining? It's not a resource-gathering skill, is it?
I don't think it is. It says I can channel it for 2 mana per... Hey, how much mana do I have anyway?
Sounds like a spell, maybe.
Lex said.
You have 20 mana. Check your character menu again.
Thanks.
Jack was about to dive into his character menu again when he refocused his attention on the woman sitting across the cabin from him.
How did you know how much mana I have?
She seemed to know some things about him and not others. She sat back in her chair.
Just inspect me, Jack.
It felt like he was about to do something overly personal, But Jack swallowed and tried to inspect the beautiful woman in front of him. A new panel came up that was similar to his own character menu. It showed a miniature Lex wearing a bulky cloak, just like she was currently wearing. At the top was written, Lex, Hero Class, Bastion, Level 24. There were a few other pieces of information. Health, 250 out of 250. Mana, 300 out of 300. There was a section farther below that was labeled Relationship, and below it was Disposition Uncertain. At the bottom of this panel was text that read, Invite to Party, and another cut stone next to it that looked like it functioned as a button. Although this one looked like it was made of granite, as opposed to the emerald and ruby gemstone ones on the trade menu he saw before. It was also slightly recessed into the panel already. His assumption was confirmed when he tried to press it, and nothing happened. He looked up at Lex, and she raised her eyebrows expectantly.
Bastion?
He asked.
I have a split path as well. One is focused on defensive skills, and the other contains healing skills. Having multiple options makes me versatile, but not as potent as someone only focusing on one path. That second one is the reason your flesh is whole again. Your entrance into our town was not a graceful one.
She crossed her arms again.
Now, tell me more about this odd combat spell under your mining path.
Well, like I said.
Jack pulled up his skills again, and while he was at it, he brought up his character menu too.
I can channel it for 2 mana per second.
He paused as he tried again to pull the useless scabbard out of his equipment slot. She was getting impatient again.
And what's the damage?
I think I deal my main hand damage every second that mining laser is active. So that means 0 damage every second for 10 seconds, right?
He smiled. She wasn't amused. Lex stood, pulled her hood up, and looked down at him. The firelight illuminating her face from underneath sent her eyes into shadows.
I'm going to the inn before I lose my rest bonus. Stay here for the night. I'll check on you before going into the tower.
She stood there for a moment, considering.
I hope you become useful and don't live up to your class, Jack. For all our sakes.
Then she walked out the door and left him alone. Jack sat on the bed with his feet on the stone floor, considering his current situation. He was in a virtual world. He was a hero with an irrelevant class. He had combat skills he assumed were for defeating enemies, somewhere, but they were useless because his character menu was glitched. On a whim, he faced the ceiling and said,
Computer, end simulation.
The command had worked in a science fiction television show that he watched as a child, but it was a long shot, and he wasn't terribly surprised when nothing happened. He stood up from the bed and the useless leather scabbard slapped his thigh. It was this thing that was responsible for his predicament, and a strong urge to get it off consumed him. Jack physically pulled on the decorative sword belt as hard as he could, and his straining muscles twitched in protest with the force he was trying to exert. Eventually, he gave up, his head throbbing from the effort. He needed some air. He walked over to the door, his bare feet pressing on the cooler stone floor, and listened to the storm outside. The door was made from rough wood planks held together by iron bands, and Jack could see intermittent lightning flash through the gaps. He ran his hand along the gray, warped surface, and it was clear that this door had seen many years. He pulled on the rusty iron ring bolted to the door, and a chilling gust of wind sent his thin cloth shirt and pants flapping around his body. This sure didn't feel like a video game. It was nighttime and completely black outside the cabin. When the dark clouds above flickered with the absent-minded lightning of a passing storm, he was able to make out other stone buildings with straw thatch roofs crouching against the rain, and the area he could see around the building he was in was covered in a thick, lush grass waving vigorously in the wind. This was not the arid Chihuahuan desert in Mexico where he had been. It looked more like Ireland. A muddy dirt path led away from the doorway out through the thick grass, and Jack saw lines of footprints gathering rainwater as they continued out into the darkness beyond. Lex must have already moved out of sight. There was no point in going out in this. The pretty blonde said she would be back in the morning. Maybe he could find a way out of here when he could see better. Jack backed into the warm cabin and shut the door on the biting rain that had been inviting itself in. He walked over to the fire and gazed into its flames. He considered how long the fire was going to last and was about to start searching for some dry firewood when another smaller panel appeared over the fire. Well-constructed fire. Duration, 2 hours, 47 minutes, and 10 seconds. The seconds were even ticking down in real time. He shook his head. Was he really still on that spaceship, his head hooked up to some hyper-sophisticated gaming hardware? Jack sat back down on the bed and opened his character menu. He tried taking off his shirt as an experiment, and it came off him instantly, reappearing in his inventory. His eyes found themselves locked on the decorative scabbard in his main hand slot, and he made another attempt at removing it. Jack cleared his mind and urged it off gently at first, but ended up almost bursting a blood vessel in his head from his intense determination. Nothing happened. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding, put his virtual shirt back on, and threw himself on the small straw mattress. With little else to do, Jack focused on his character panel instead. Level 1. Health, 10 out of 10. Mana, 20 out of 20. Defense, 2. Dodge, 10. Main hand damage, 0. Offhand damage, 0. Hit chance, 0.85. Critical chance, 0.01. Magic power, 0. Pretty basic setup for an adventure combat game, but he noticed the lack of a basic staple. Experience points.
Whatever,
he said, shaking his head in frustration. Did any of this really matter? His only goal was getting out of this bizarre fantasy simulation. Jack folded his arms behind his head as he tried to absorb his long, intense, and confusing day. Eventually, before the fire's duration ticked its last second and winked out, Jack drifted off to sleep. Chapter 5. True to her word, Lex returned to the cabin the next morning.
Jack!
She called and pounded on the door a few times, startling him out of a deep sleep. He had no idea where he was for a moment, but it was her voice calling his name that had jogged his awareness. The cabin looked different in the pale daylight, and the stone slab floor was much colder without the fire. He climbed out of bed, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Lex had backed away from the door and waited in the center of the dirt path. It was the first time he saw her in daylight. She was still wearing the bulky cloak, but her hood was down. Her straight golden hair was short and ended just past her shoulders. Her pointed ears poked out on each side. Jack stepped onto the sun-warmed ground and joined her in the daylight. The sky was gray with total cloud cover, but the sun was just behind them, casting a filtered brightness across the land. The vibrant green blades of wild grass swayed gently in a breeze laden with the scent of salt that could only be carried from a nearby ocean. Standing next to Lex for the first time, he noticed that she was shorter than he was by a foot.
Greetings, Jack. I wanted to introduce you to someone before I head into the tower,
she said.
What are you doing there?
Jack tested the ground with his bare feet. It had absorbed most of the water, so his toes only sank a little into the soft earth.
Keep this place going.
She got a far-off look in her eyes as she gazed at the building he had spent the night in. Jack looked around more carefully and saw that he was standing in the middle of a run-down farm. There was the hint of a barely defined fence in the field to his right, with wooden posts sticking out of the tall grass. Behind the field was a large building with a faded red tint that looked like it used to be a barn, but the roof was mostly absent.
Who used to live here?
He asked, suddenly feeling a little odd about whose bed he had slept in.
Hume. He was a good man and a good farmer. Come with me, Jack.
Lex abruptly turned and walked away from him. Jack quickened his pace until he was next to the shorter woman. As they moved past the stone cabin where he spent the night, something that shouldn't exist drew his gaze. To his right was a massive stone tower that continued up into the sky where it vanished into the gray clouds above. Based on what little he knew of physics, the structure shouldn't be able to stand under its own weight. It was marginally wider at the bottom, but after a certain point, the tower straightened out and reached taller than anything Jack had ever seen.
Wow,
he said. Lex just looked at him briefly and kept walking.
Is that where I came from?
Yes, directly out of the entrance, and certainly not at the right time,
she said, looking at the tower. Jack didn't quite grasp why those two things were important, but she seemed to think they were. If he wanted to get back home, going in there might be a good start.
Could I come with you? Into the tower?
You would die. I don't want to be responsible for that.
Jack couldn't take his eyes off of the impossible sight as they walked. He noticed an arched wooden door at its base, and in front of the door was a slightly raised, flat stone circle surrounded by a short wall with a weak spring of water leaking out of a hole at its center, like a fountain with its water shut off. Jack noticed Lex was ahead of him again. She moved fast for being as short as she was.
Hey, I never thanked you for healing my shredded backside,
he said when he caught up to her again.
I wanted to say I really appreciate your help.
She gave a quick nod in response, keeping her head straight ahead. Jack didn't like how cold and distant she had become. He quickly added,
Don't worry about me getting in the way too much. I'll be out of here and back to where I came from as soon as I figure all this out.
She responded by walking even faster. After a minute of walking, they approached an intersection in the dirt path. The fountain and the tower were directly to the right. To the left was a square stone building situated as if it were built to be exactly in line with the tower. It was raised up on a small ridge with a few half-buried stone steps leading to the door. Jack looked around, trying to drink it all in. The land was green and lush, and everything around him was either dirt, thick grass, wood, or stone. Lex turned left at the intersection and continued toward the square stone building while Jack lingered at the crossroads. The imposing tower stabbing into the clouds was something out of a dream. As his eyes explored the area around the fascinating structure, Jack noticed that most of the ground around its base was covered in thousands of small pebbles. The ground ended abruptly behind the tower, and beyond its edge he saw a thin glimpse of a vast, dark ocean as it met the horizon. He closed his eyes and let the crisp sea air fill his lungs.
Jack!
Lex called from behind him.
Sorry!
He turned and jogged up the path to where she was.
I've never seen anything like this.
Lex simply turned away from him and continued toward their destination. Stone boulders made up the building's walls, and the thatched roof looked like it was made from a dried-out version of the thick grass that was all around him. Unlike the cabin he had slept in, this building had a row of windows facing out toward the tower. Thick gray wooden shutters covered them all. Lex stepped up the few flat stones that led to a set of double doors and pulled one of them open. With the interior exposed, ocean winds raced inside, sending the smell of grilled food outward into Jack's face as he stood behind her. His stomach made a fist and reminded him that he hadn't eaten in a while. Everything felt so real, he wondered briefly if this actually was his real body. He followed Lex inside and recognized the layout instantly as an inn. There were a few long wooden tables with long benches and a large hearth in the far right wall. Ahead was a counter with a few stools that must have been the bar. Tucked away in the back corner, Jack noticed a small square stage made from wooden boards. For performances, perhaps? There was a stairway leading up to a second floor on the back wall, and a blue curtain with a giant white eye painted on it hung behind the bar. Jack and Lex were alone. She walked straight to the bar and called out,
Demi, we're here.
Jack followed her and figured there had to be a kitchen behind the curtain. Lex came to a stop when she got to the rough wooden counter and leaned her elbows onto it.
Sit down, Jack,
she said. He took one of the stools and pulled it out a bit. The smooth stone floor was cold on his bare feet, and he welcomed the chance to not be touching it. Old and cloudy bottles of random shapes, colors, and sizes stacked against the back wall caught his attention, but he didn't get to look for long before something unusual happened to Lex in his periphery that made him turn his head. The heavy hooded cloak she was always wearing had suddenly vanished, and she was standing before him in a tight black leather outfit. Jack only had time to blink before a small wooden shield appeared on her left arm, and after that, a sharp-looking short sword in her right hand. Lex reached past her pointed ear, grabbed a leather sheath strapped to her back with her free hand, and thrust her sword into it without looking. She was magnificent. Important vital areas were covered in thick leather patches, but around those, the tight, dark leather clung to her newly revealed shape in some amazing ways. She was more petite than he would have guessed, and from the side he noticed that her small nose pointed up slightly at the end. Jack was just staring at her profile open-mouthed when the painted curtain was thrown open behind the bar. When he turned to look, he saw a tall woman standing where the painted white eye had been, taking them both in. She had straight silver hair that cascaded down over her shoulders like a waterfall, and piercing blue eyes that focused on Jack.
Okay, Demi, he's all yours.
Lex waved a hand and turned to leave, and Jack turned his head to watch her go. When she got to the door, he called out,
"See you later."
Lex pushed the wooden door out of her way without turning around and was gone.
You'll never have her if you don't climb the tower.
The woman behind the bar purred right by his ear. She quietly leaned on the counter to get close, but slowly straightened herself as she watched his reaction. She had an amused smirk tugging on the corner of her thin lips, and he found her pretty, in a refined type of way that only older women could be.
Have her?
Jack stammered.
No. Who are you? Why am I here? I want to find a way back to where I came from. Can you help me log off? Out? Or whatever?
I am Demi, owner of the Eye of the Storm.
She spread her long arms to indicate the building they were in.
You are here so I can keep my eye on you. Perhaps learn more about you and what you mean to this town. Where you came from is certainly a question I wish to explore, but first...
Demi held up a single slender finger, then turned and stepped into the kitchen, pulling the curtain closed behind her. The painted eye was looking down at him again. Jack was alone at the bar with his thoughts for a moment. She was his babysitter. He was being watched by an adult, so he didn't hurt himself. He was growing impatient with being helpless and lost. Demi came spinning back from behind the curtain with a plate and a wooden mug in her hand. She set both down in front of Jack. In the middle of the plate was 2 grilled pieces of whitefish. A moment later, she set down a bent fork next to the plate.
First plate's free,
she said, and backed away from the bar top to give him some room.
Now, tell me your story, Jack.
And tell he did. Between the warm meal going into his stomach and her penetrating gaze, Jack told her everything. He started with his life working on the survey team. Then, after talking about getting away from his family and wanting to explore the hidden places of the world, he moved on to the haunted, abandoned spaceship, the song that led him here, and the eon he spent in a formless, psychedelic ocean. He recounted his uncomfortable arrival, with Lex appearing and helping him, singing the same song, and he might have let slip how beautiful he thought her voice was. He went into detail about his abilities and the useless item he could not remove. He finally ended with his theory about being sucked into a perfectly real-feeling virtual role-playing game, even down to the food he was currently eating. She listened to everything he had to say. She didn't interrupt him once. When he was done spilling his guts, Demi nodded, took his plate and fork, and vanished behind the curtain again. Jack drank the rest of the water in his mug, feeling pretty good in general. Demi returned with a rusty sword and carefully laid it on the bar in front of him. The hilt was loosely wrapped in cracked leather, and the reddish-brown spots along its edge made him think this weapon had been sitting out in the elements for years. Jack focused on the blade before him, and a small lacquered panel appeared above it. Rusty iron short sword. Sword, value 1, damage 1.
Now I will tell you a story,
she said, looking down at him.
My son became a hero in this very town, in this very establishment. This was a time when my inn was 3 stories tall and almost always filled with thirsty climbers. A time when the fountain's clear waters touched the sky. He was peeling potatoes when it happened. One moment he was a cook, and the next he was a hero. It had always been his dream. After he spent some time leveling and unlocking his path, the high-damage fire abilities he'd acquired were sought after by other parties going on deep item runs within the tower. My son had such fine control of the flames that he could create intricate and dazzling displays in the midnight sky. Only on the stillest of nights, when the sea was quiet, would he put on a grand spectacle for all of Blackmoor. A rare event in our stormy cove.
The silver-haired innkeeper gazed over Jack's shoulder without focus for a moment, then locked her eyes back on his.
My son helped to feed the town such powerful items that the low-valued trash ones, like this sword, were kept for the townsfolk. Back when my beautiful inn was a destination, and not just a stone husk. The creeping corruption was pushed miles back. These days, you never know when a few wandering demon spawn could stroll in the front door, just in time for dinner. Ellis, my son, was not content with his remote hometown. I couldn't blame him. I did the same thing when I was young. He traveled out into the world to see other towns and other towers.
She paused and looked down at the rusty blade she had placed on the bar.
It happened slowly, and for no one reason, but the town began to receive fewer items than it had before. Some heroes left with Ellis. A party here and there went in to climb the tower, but never came out. The town slipped a level, and we lost the stable first. It took a long time, but the corruption crept in, advancing closer as the town lost levels. It's at level 1 now, and Blackmoor Cove has been isolated for a long time. The town should not have been able to spawn new townsfolk, much less a hero.
Demi reached out and put her slender hand on his forearm before continuing.
This is important, Jack. If you want to get out of this place and back to the madness that you described, then you need to feed the town.
She pushed the sword toward him, its dented iron hilt scraping against the wooden counter.
You are a bonus. Even if you must put this trash sword in your offhand and struggle on the first floor doing minimal damage, you will go into the tower and bring back items. You will do this until the town levels up enough to push back the corruption. Only then can you think about leaving.
Jack sat there blinking at her. There was a lot to unpack here. She seemed to understand that he needed a moment and just leaned back again, her arms crossed on her chest, watching him.
Feed the town? People go into the tower to get items to feed the town. How?
He asked.
You'll figure it out. Try equipping that sword.
She nodded her head at the blade on the counter.
Maybe you'll have an unusually high dual-wield skill, what with all of your other uniqueness.
Never one to turn down a free sword, Jack reached out for it. As he touched it with his right hand with the intent to wield it, he felt that same awful discordant feeling reverberating through his body as he had before, in the cabin with Lex. He pulled his hand away like the sword was a hot stove. A familiar panel appeared. You cannot remove this item. Please increase complexity S% parenthesis null parenthesis for more options. Jack looked up at Demi to see her usually straight silver eyebrows arched slightly.
You really did just fall from the sky, didn't you? Lex told me as much.
She stopped herself.
Try the other one. Your offhand.
Jack braced himself as he reached out with his left hand, expecting anything to happen. His fingers closed on its grip and had no trouble picking it up, but it felt awkwardly heavy. Jack stood up and waved it around a few times with his offhand, moving away from the bar to get some room. The weapon felt unbalanced, and he had a hard time controlling where it went. Perhaps now he could deal some damage at least. He pulled up his character screen to check for changes. Offhand damage, 1. Jack smiled as he thrust the rusty iron sword up over his head and almost dropped it. It felt like a pressure was lifted when he realized he wasn't completely useless. He reflected for a moment with a little unease at how normal this place was quickly becoming to him. He shook it off and swung the sword around in front of him, trying to get a handle on taming its movements.
Be prepared to take it slow in there,
Demi said with a grave tone.
Using basic attacks with your offhand won't be easy until you find and hold on to better equipment.
She pointed one of her long fingers at him.
And the way you are flopping that thing around, you'll be lucky to hit anything. What's your chance to hit?
Jack reopened his interface. Hit chance, 23%.
It's not good,
he said, frowning. He pulled up his inventory menu, and as an experiment, he unequipped the rusty iron sword Demi had given him. He was worried for a moment, but it popped right out and into his inventory. Jack looked back over to his character panel. Hit chance, 85%.
But I can punch things pretty reliably for no damage.
She shrugged.
Not good at much, then. For now.
Jack re-equipped the sword from his menu and waved it around a few more times, not quite able to direct its wild flailing. He must have looked ridiculous. The memory of Lex sheathing her sword behind her back without looking popped into his mind, and her elegance was a stark contrast to his pathetic floundering. Jack grabbed his scabbard with his free hand and peeked into its dark, leathery depths. It appeared as if the dull blade he was holding would fit. Might as well use it for something, after all. He carefully shoved his new sword into his useless scabbard, but it was awkward to do with his left hand. A sudden flash of light filled his vision and blinded him. He heard Demi gasp by the bar, so he knew it wasn't just in his mind. After a few seconds of blinking, their sight returned. Jack looked down to see the iron sword inside the scabbard.
What the hell was that?
He asked.
I don't know, but you were as bright as the sun,
she said, rubbing her eyes.
Come show me that sword, Jack.
He reached over, pulled it out of its scabbard, and started walking back to the bar.
Jack,
she repeated.
Yeah, I'm like 3 steps away. Hold your horses.
He wondered if she would even know what that meant, but was proud of himself for using a phrase that was probably safe.
No, look how you are holding that.
She pointed, her bright blue eyes wide as she regarded him.
Check your main hand slot, Jack.
Jack opened his menu and looked at the leather scabbard and belt item that was still there, but the image was different. There was now a sword in the scabbard. He focused on the item equipped in his main hand slot. ARV Alternus, sword, value 1 out of 10, damage 1. It had transformed into a sword-type item, and a smile spread across Jack's face as he realized what this meant. But he only got to enjoy it for a moment before a booming voice echoed in his ears.
More tower!
Chapter 6.
What are you doing?
Demi asked Jack as he stood in the middle of the inn with his hands covering his ears.
What was that deafening voice about?
He asked. The look on her face told him that she didn't hear anything.
You didn't hear it, did...
What did the voices say, Jack?
She interrupted, her eyes holding him evenly.
More tower!
Jack shouted in his deepest voice. She raised her eyebrows and then shook her head.
Well, at least the voices are pointing you in the right direction.
It's just the one voice,
Jack said. He was starting to get the sinking feeling in his stomach again. He was in some strange virtual world, and now he was hearing voices. It occurred to him it might have something to do with his new weapon. He opened his character panel and gazed at his main hand slot again, hesitantly. The last time he tried to look at this, he almost pissed himself when that impossibly loud voice hit him from all sides. A stray line of thought derailed Jack for a moment as he realized it had been a while since he had needed to empty his bladder, and he wondered just how realistic this world was. He'd find out soon enough, he told himself with a shrug. With a preemptive wince, Jack focused on his new weapon and the panel opened. ARV Alternus, sword, value 1 out of 10, damage 1. No booming voice this time. It still had a crazy name, but at least now the item in his equipment slot was a sword type, and that meant he could use his combat skills. He looked over at his other combat-related stats. Main hand damage 1, hit chance 87%. More good news.
You sure are a strange one, Jack,
Demi said.
The likes of which I have never seen. Let's put you to good use. First watch will be coming to eat in a little while. I'll get some cleaning done early while you go and get the morning catch from Saul, the wharf master down by the cove. Some sea air will do you good.
She was appraising him again. Jack could feel it. He also felt like he was just given a quest. Was he going to play along with this simulation? He entertained the idea of just running to the tiny door at the base of the massive tower out there. That might be all he needed to do to get back to the real world. There was also part of him that felt like it was a bad idea that he might not be able to take back. Whatever it was that had infected him before had been spreading with sickening speed. Maybe he was being held in a type of hibernation and waking up early would be bad? Jack decided that he wanted more information. Right now, following along, exploring, and learning more about this place seemed like a good idea.
Sure thing. How do I get there?
Head out and take a left. Follow the winding path down to the beach. You'll see it. Tell Saul you want 15 fish for me. When you get back, and after the guards leave, I'll take you to the barracks and introduce you to Cron. Maybe he can outfit you with a bit better than cloth for your first tower climb.
She waved a hand at his bare feet.
Here is the payment for the fish,
the innkeeper said as she extended her arm out to Jack above the bar. He patted across the stone slabs over to her, and when he got close enough, a trade window opened. Trade offered. Demi, 30 coins. Jack selected the emerald gemstone below the word accept.
Don't go spending all that coin in the sweet shop on the way,
Demi wagged her finger back and forth, a serious look on her face.
Now, go,
she said, dismissing him with a wave.
And come back soon. Don't want to be to blame for hungry guardsmen.
Jack nodded and walked out of the eye of the storm and into the sunlight. The stone slab stairs outside had soaked in the sun's energy and warmed his feet. The clouds had broken up a bit during his chat with Demi, and strong winds now blew endless piles of white cotton over his head. Above the racing clouds, a deep cobalt blue filled the sky, and Jack got his first glimpse of the burnt orange sun above. It was more orange than he remembered the sun being, and its stark contrast against the vividly dark blue felt alien and surreal. But not as surreal as the impossible structure ahead. Between the clouds rushing inland, Jack was able to see that the tower continued into the sky in a straight, irrational line up as far as he could see. He watched, mesmerized, as a thick bank of clouds struck the distant stones and spilled around it, swirling and dissipating in the stiff ocean breeze. Forcing his feet to move, he headed down the warm dirt trail and took a left turn at the intersection. Ahead of him, he could see a handful of smaller stone buildings grouped along the path. As he got closer, he noticed the long, dark shadow of the tower dividing the land between the inn and the group of buildings down the path. He wondered if the shadow would line up with the inn right at noon. That would be convenient. He gazed at the tower again as he passed into its shadow. If he looked up at the dark stone blocks long enough, it seemed to be falling on top of him. Jack quickened his pace until he got out from under its shadow and felt the warm sun again. The crumbling stone buildings spread out along the trail appeared to be houses. They sat quietly as fleeting shadows from the clouds above moved over their weathered stone walls and gray thatch roofs. Some looked relatively whole, others seemed abandoned, and all of them looked very old. Jack heard a low howling made by the wind passing through the ancient structures. As he put the mournful wailing of the mossy stone homes behind him, he turned to look out over the waist-high lush grass growing everywhere. In the distance ahead of him, the land curved right and downward in front of a dirt embankment. Black rocks jutted out of the rich earth and rose higher as the path sloped down, bending towards the ocean on his right. Between the abandoned farm, the inn, and the sad stone houses, there wasn't much town to speak of. Everything was spread out and seemed to have been built a long time ago.
Sweet shop. My ass,
Jack said to himself. He came to the part of the path that curved to the right and led downward to a stretch of beach with the vast indigo ocean just beyond. Like the sky, the water seemed much darker than it should be. Jack stopped and took a moment to get a sense of his surroundings before heading down to the beach. Directly ahead of him, the path ran straight into the 10-foot slope of dirt and black stones. To his left were fields of thick grass on rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. He wondered what was beyond the natural wall ahead, and saw that if he walked about 100 yards out into the grass, he could get to a point where two elevations converged to be the same height. The unknown places of this strange world urged Jack to ignore his quest and find his own way, but a few reasons came to mind as to why he shouldn't go exploring just yet. With a sigh, he turned toward the ocean on his right and headed down to the beach. Near the raising embankment to his left, the ground was more mud than dirt, as a trickle of a vanishing river traveled downward, and he realized the angled path carved into the land must be a natural formation caused by rainwater trying to find its way to the sea. Jack's bare feet were saved from the muck by smooth black stones that served as convenient steps as he climbed down to the beach. Jack neared the bottom of the narrow path, and with his view no longer obstructed by dirt walls to either side, he finally beheld the cove that gave Blackmoor Cove its name. The huge black boulders that had started emerging from the earthen wall to his left continued straight into the sea and made a natural breakwater, protecting most of the beach from destructive, deep ocean waves. Violent white explosions of frothy water could be seen crashing against the slick black rocks as they rose out of the ocean. The gigantic boulders became smaller as they curved around the bay, cradling it as would a mother's arm hold her child. Off the beach and parallel with the tower, he noticed a wooden structure sitting on the edge of the sand with a sprawling network of docks stretching away from it out into the dark waters of the cove. Having assumed he had found the wharf, Jack patted his feet along the beach. To his right was the bottom of the sheer cliffside he had seen from town. It had to be a good 50-foot drop. The tower could easily be seen extending into space even from this low angle, and Jack wondered if there was any place where he couldn't see it. Beyond the dock and out in the cove were tiny rowboats with men gathering up nets from the water. Giant white birds circled above them, while others were scattered on the beach along the coast picking at hidden morsels in the sand or sleeping in the warm sun. Jack thought they looked and sounded like seagulls, only these were much, much larger. He walked near a group that followed him with their black eyes as he passed. One humongous bird in particular found Jack interesting for longer than the others, and it felt like he was losing his sense of perspective. The birds appeared to be as big as minivans. Eventually, the massive bird staring him down lost interest as Jack moved away, and it cried out into the ocean breeze. As Jack approached the wharf, he started to hear someone yelling. There was a long, weather-beaten wooden building blocking his view of the angry person, and Jack paused before climbing the few sun-bleached steps leading up onto the docks ahead of him. He turned his ear to catch their words, but the gentle waves that lapped against the logs holding the wharf above the water washed out most of what was being said. He caught something about incompetence and foolishness. Jack heaved a sigh. He had some fish to buy and had a bad feeling that the guy sounding like an asshole was the person he was looking for. When he moved past the rickety wooden building, Jack saw 3 men standing on the central part of the dock. The one shouting appeared to be wearing black, silky judge's robes, and he was shaking his fist in the air. The other 2 were wearing rolled-up pants and loose-fitting gray cotton shirts. Their heads hung as the vitriol crashed down on them from the other man. As Jack walked along the wooden slats, his eyes shot downward, feeling a fiercely painful jab from a splinter pierce into his soft, exposed foot. He rested his ankle into his knee and removed the small shard of wood from his heel, and out of the corner of his eye he noticed a small girl in a deep burgundy dress lying on her back in one of the rowboats bobbing in the water, tied to one of the posts. She had a doll wedged into the crook of her elbow, and her wide gray eyes locked on Jack. He paused, wondering if she needed help.
"Hey, you! Get over here!"
Jack looked to see if he was the one being addressed, and sure enough, all 3 men were looking at him now. He looked back down at the girl, and she had a finger on her lips, making the universal sign of keep your mouth shut.
"Hey, stupid! I'm talking to you!"
called the man in robes again. Jack was concerned for her, but did as she asked and walked towards the 3 men, careful not to drag his feet. They were all staring at him as he walked. The 2 other men were deeply tanned and looked like they spent a lot of time out in the open. One was younger, tall with long arms and legs. The other was older with gray hair and had full bushy eyebrows that swallowed his eyes in shadow. The man in the robes held his nose in the air, and a sour frown drooped on his face as if he couldn't stand the smell around him. Jack started talking to the man in the robes a few steps before he reached the trio.
Hi there. I'm Jack. You must be the wharf master. I was sent by Demi to collect, 15 fish.
It seemed so oddly specific. The man in the robes looked him over.
"Yes, the irrelevant hero. I thought Herrick had been deep in his joyweed when his rumor spread about your arrival. But here you are. Well, Jack, I am indeed Sol the Wharf Master, and there won't be enough fish today, as these idiots lost their nets in the storm last night. It seems like uselessness is in high supply these days."
The man turned to the two fishermen and held his pointy nose a bit higher.
Isn't that right, boys?
Jack did not find this man very pleasant and wanted to get this over with. The man with the gray in his beard kept his shadowed eyes locked on Jack while the wharf master continued.
It's going to take a full day to harvest the materials for another one, so I suggest you both do something useful and go gather them from the coast. You'd better get moving if you want to eat by tomorrow.
Soul, the older man began in a quiet, deep voice.
The net probably just washed down shore. Now that a hero is here, perhaps he could help retrieve it. It's much faster than making a new one. Wyben, get to gathering materials, should the net be out to sea.
The man named Soul scowled while the old fisherman spoke, then wrinkled his nose in disgust.
Fine, Garl, take him. If you're wrong, it's on you when the corruption takes us. If you don't die and if you bring the net back, Jack, I can trade you the fish.
He abruptly spun around and stalked off down the main dock. After a moment, the wharf master called out over his shoulder.
And if you see my foolish daughter, tell her to return to the wharf where it's safe.
When he disappeared into the wooden building connected to the main dock, the young man let out a long sigh of relief, as if he had been holding his breath this whole time.
Oh, stupid sea, stealing our net.
He shook a gangly fist at the expansive body of water around them. The older man spoke calmly.
Go, Wyben, get collecting seaweed.
The kid looked at Garl for a moment, and his shoulders slumped.
Ugh. Fine.
The young man made it a few steps, then stopped and turned back toward Jack.
Welcome to Blackmoor Cove, hero. I sure hope you can help turn this place around.
Jack didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Wyben sighed again and made his way down the main dock. Jack watched him go, wondering what he had gotten himself into. No one seemed very happy here.
The name's Garl,
the older man said, offering his hand. Jack took it, and they shared a firm shake. Jack nodded once. Finally, someone was treating him like an adult.
Nice to meet you, Garl. So, what is going on here?
Jack asked.
Let's walk and talk,
he said before walking down the dock toward the shore. Jack shrugged and followed Garl. He had nothing better to do, and it seemed to be part of the quest to get the fish he needed. It definitely felt like he was in a video game, and he was really starting to believe that he should be playing along as much as possible. Eventually, he would learn enough to get out.
I need your help to retrieve the missing net. Will you help me?
Garl continued as they walked.
Sure. But more importantly, why do you need me to find a net washed up on the beach? And what's that "if you don't die" part all about?
Jack asked as they passed the small wooden boat where the girl, who he now assumed was the wharf master's daughter, had been hiding earlier. It was empty.
It might be washed up beyond the corruption farther down the coast,
Garl said patiently.
And that's deadly?
The old fisherman stopped mid-step. He was shorter than Jack, but sturdy, and he looked like he'd worked hard his whole life. Garl's serious eyes regarded him from under his tangle of eyebrows.
The rumors are true after all, he mumbled. Harrick was right. You just don't know.
Jack was getting tired of this.
Then just tell me!
The old fisherman's eyes went wide for a moment, and Jack could see them clearly for the first time. They were a dim aquamarine, but seemed sharp. The moment passed, and Garl let his eyebrows fall back into their normal resting place. He laced his hands behind his back and continued down the coast, trudging through the white sand. Jack followed.
The corruption is all around us, Garl said. As the town grows weaker, it cannot push the vile filth back anymore, so it closes in. The corruption's always pressing against the barrier, draining its power. If someone doesn't loot the tower for items of value to feed the town, the corruption will cover everything, killing everyone. If it reaches the tower, very dire things happen. To answer your question, if townsfolk like me touched the corruption, I could die instantly. Or worse. But someone like you, Jack, a hero, you can cross. Minor negative effects, yes, but as long as you come back into the town's protective influence, you'll be fine.
He waved a weathered, leathery hand in the air. They walked down the beach in silence for a while before Jack asked another question.
Where does the corruption come from?
For all I know, it has always been. When I was young, my grandfather told me stories of a time long ago when there was more open land than there was corruption. I don't know if those stories were true, but what is certain is that the corruption is slowly consuming everything.
They walked further in silence. Jack looked back over his shoulder and saw the wharf was getting smaller. He was getting a lot of information from Garl and without a lot of judgment for once, so he asked another question.
Who built the towers?
The towers, along with the corruption, have always existed. No one knows who built them or how. I've never been in one. I am not a hero. I am told the inside is an ever-changing maze with unending monsters and infinite treasure. No one I've ever met is capable of building such a wonder. The towers provide the items that feed the towns, if there are heroes brave enough to take them. That is just the way of things.
Jack looked up at the cliffs that loomed above them. The stone structure could still be seen in the distance up on the cliff above, stretching impossibly high. He thought of Lexin there fighting monsters, and felt a mix of excitement and worry. A growing part of him was itching to get in there and loot some items. Jack shook his head slowly as he walked behind the stumpy old fisherman. There was still a very good chance that he was trapped in a cave-in and his oxygen-starved brain had made all this insanity up. Climb the tower to feed the town?
There it is,
Garl called out calmly, pointing down the coast.
I can see the net.
Jack followed Garl's gesture and saw a writhing black and purple mass on the beach before he saw the net. The substance looked like thick moss with worm-like tendrils writhing and twitching about. The sandy beach ahead was only covered with seaweed and shells for about 30 yards, but was covered for miles beyond that by what must be the corruption he had heard so much about. Then something clicked in Jack's brain.
I've seen this before. In my world. In the ancient alien ship.
Chapter 7.
Your world?
Garl asked, looking at him.
Yeah. I'm sure you'll find it easy to believe that I'm not from here. This stuff.
Jack paused. It looked slightly different, but he could tell this was the same strange filth from before.
Are you sure I won't be infected with that?
I'm sure,
Garl said, looking at him.
It wouldn't do me any good to get you killed.
Jack looked down at his bare feet and made fists in the warm sand with them.
I don't know if I can do this.
Here.
Garl held out his hand and a trade screen popped up before Jack's eyes. Trade offered. Garl. Fished up boots. Feet. Value 0. Defense 1. Discarded, flimsy, and smell of the sea.
I found them in my net a while back. Fitting they will end up helping to snag the very same net. Let's hurry. The corruption looks weak here, but spawned demons might be attracted to our presence.
Spawned what?
Jack asked, accepting the trade.
Where the corruption is dense, it can spawn monsters that will attack us. They almost always attack the wall, but we can chat on the way back. Get those boots on and get my net.
Jack looked across the mass of corruption and saw the fishing net spread out near the edge of the water. He opened his inventory and equipped the item in his foot slot. Instantly, he was slightly taller and gazed down to his feet covered by thin leather boots. They were worn down and pretty beat up, but they were a perfect fit. Everything here probably was, he thought. Jack expected some of the sand from his trek across the beach to be trapped inside his boots, but to his surprise, there was nothing. Jack made his way over to the edge of the corruption, and as he inched closer to the writhing black mess, he started to feel very uneasy about this. He figured that if he walked quickly, it would only take him a minute or so to get it and come back. Jack took a deep breath and put one foot down into the writhing mass of disgusting corruption on the beach. There was a very unpleasant squishing sound, accompanied by moderate queasiness. An alert appeared in his field of vision. It wasn't like any of the ornate black lacquered menus he had seen. This was a purple drop icon with an orange square behind it. If he focused his attention on it, he got a pop-up information panel. Weak corruption drain. Lose 1 HP every 60 seconds. Active while touching corruption. It will consume you. He pulled his boot back out of the infected section of beach, and the corruption drain icon disappeared. Jack looked back over his shoulder. Garl was watching him with his shadowed eyes, but said nothing. He turned back to the stretch of disgusting writhing mess ahead of him. The corruption spread across the beach and up to the top of the cliff, but he saw no monsters out there at the moment. With the coast literally looking clear, Jack gathered his courage, held his breath, and sprinted toward the net. The moment he crossed over its influence, he felt sick again, and the icon flashed as it reappeared. His new boots slipped in the thin layer of oozing pus below him as he ran, but he managed to keep his feet under him. Holding his breath seemed like the right thing to do at first, but he let it out in a puff when he reached the net. He was going to pass out if he tried to hold his breath and sprint much longer. The corruption was crawling all over it, and for a few rapid heartbeats, he didn't think he was going to be able to make himself grab it. He was completely surrounded by the crawling filth and could hear a kind of bubbling sucking as the tendrils writhed. He was about to panic and bolt back without grabbing the net when he noticed a spot of rope that wasn't completely covered in the black, slimy strings. Jack snagged the net and ran, dragging it behind him. Just as he was about halfway back, a new sickening feeling hit him when he lost his first hit point. In the corner of his field of vision, he saw his current and max hit points appear with a flash. HP, 9 out of 10. He was 1/10 dead. Jack sprinted as fast as he could and jumped over the last few feet of the corruption. He skidded to a halt in the sand and fell to his knees. Dropping the net, he frantically searched his boots and his hands, but there was no sign of any remaining infestation. Other than his heart beating itself out of his chest, he felt fine. The corruption drain icon was gone, but he was still down 1 hit point. Jack realized he still wasn't quite sure about the consequences for losing all his hit points. He remembered other people talking about people dying, but they were all NPCs, right? Computer-controlled, non-player characters. Jack focused on the tiny grains of sand sparkling in the sunlight. No one in here seemed to be a real person, but he had to admit that he didn't really know anything for sure. Something heavy slapped him on the shoulder, and Jack almost jumped out of his skin.
"Time to head back,"
Garl said, looking down on him. The man had already rolled up the net and tucked it under his other arm. It also appeared to be completely free of corruption.
Do you know how to log off, Garl?
Jack asked, gazing out at the vast ocean to his right.
"Log off? You mean lumberjacking? You'll have to ask Pan. I know only of fishing."
Forget it,
Jack said as he stood up and dusted the sand off his pants. He opened his character window and mentally selected his boots, intending to open a trade panel with Garl. Unsurprisingly, just thinking about the intention of doing it initiated the trade. The old fisherman grunted. The interface flashed red for a moment before a bright red "declined" appeared across the panel, then it all faded away.
"Keep the boots."
Thank you. I'll put them to good use.
They walked back along the beach in silence. Jack found it hard to take his eyes off the looming tower in the distance. He also kept thinking about his hit points. Eventually, they made it back to the wharf, and Jack marveled at how his legs started to ache from tromping through sand and leather boots.
It's so real.
he muttered to himself as he came to a stop by the pier. Garl looked over at him but said nothing.
"Ah, the hero has returned,"
called Sol, with a slightly mocking dramatic flourish, from inside the rickety wooden structure, and Jack could see his balding head through an open window. The wharf master stood and walked out onto the dock.
"And I see you have the net. Garl, get out there now. And don't forget to go snag Wyben."
Sol shifted his attention to Jack as he stepped down from the dock to the beach.
"And you, hero, I believe you came here for a transaction."
Jack noticed a change in his attitude, and the constant scowl that had shown like a V on his forehead seemed to relax. The intense robed man thrust out his hand, and a trade panel appeared.
15 fish, I believe, is the usual order.
Trade offered. Sol. The painted image of a stack of fish sat in a pile on the wharf master's side, and the number 15 appeared in white letters just below it. Jack inspected the item stack. Ocean fish, meat, cooking, times 15. Jack indicated that he wanted to add his entire stack of 30 coins into his side of the trade, then pressed his confirm button.
I'm afraid you'll need a total of 45 coin for this transaction.
Jack looked past the game interface and focused on Sol's face.
Hey, I was told
Fish are rare today, boy,
Sol interrupted.
Rarer items incur higher costs. Simple economics.
Jack started to feel like he was getting ripped off and wondered if this quest for 15 fish was going to get ridiculously complicated. Garl, who hadn't left yet, spoke calmly from Jack's side.
He saved most of the day's fishing, Sol. Besides, if the guards start missing meals, Kron will investigate.
Sol's scowl returned. He thought for a moment, then turned a stare towards Jack that seemed to bore into his soul. With his short salt and pepper hair sticking out over his ears and his long robes, the wharf master looked just like an angry owl.
Dude, I don't have any more money anyway. This is my first morning in your town.
Sol thrust out his hand and made a pawing motion in the air in front of his face. The trade interface had been accepted by both parties and faded from existence.
Get out of my sight, both of you!
Sol growled before heading back to whatever he did sitting at his desk. Garl nodded to Jack and then also walked away, getting back to pulling meat from the sea. Jack walked back along the coast, his feet wrapped in new boots and his inventory full of fish, and it didn't take long at all to make it back up the path to the inn. The sun was mostly shrouded in more cloud cover, but Jack could see the dim shadow of the tower falling just past the inn on the far side. When he arrived and pushed open the door, he discovered the Eye of the Storm now had a handful of patrons, and they all swiveled their heads to look at him standing in the doorway. There were about 6 men and women, all wearing mismatched sets of armor. Some looked surprised, and a few looked angry.
There you are, Jack. Come bring me the delivery.
Demi's voice drew his attention to the bar, and there he saw a tall, heavily armored man watching him. Jack ordered his feet to move and walked up to the bar. As he got closer, he questioned his own sense of perspective again when he noticed how large the man really was. Maybe it was the armor, but he was wide, not just tall. He wore a thick metal helmet that only exposed his face with 2 massive metal horns curved forward from its sides, making him look absolutely demonic. Jack stepped up to the bar, ignoring the imposing man and his disapproving frown. With a thought, Jack initiated a trade panel with Demi. He moved the ocean fish over to her side and confirmed the trade. The window vanished, and Demi smiled.
Thanks, Jack. This is Kron,
she said, holding out a palm towards the man with the horns. She then addressed the people sitting at the tables behind him.
Just a moment, everyone.
Then she disappeared behind the painted eye curtain, and Jack turned to face the man looming over him. He must have been 8 feet tall and older than Jack, based on the deep lines creased into his sun-baked leathery face. His eyes were a steely light gray and seemed to be more illuminated than they ought to be, given the dim lighting. Everybody here was so intense. In a deep and measured voice, the man spoke.
What took you so long?
Maybe it was Cron's accusing tone, or maybe it was being stuck in this dreary place, but Jack fought the urge to punch him right in his dumb face, despite the clear difference in experience and weight class. He channeled it into passive-aggressive sarcasm instead.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I'm Jack.
Jack pointed a thumb to himself. He had to lean a little, but he looked past the wide frame of Cron and addressed the guards sitting at the empty tables with more volume behind his voice.
Hey, everyone!
Jack said with a wave and a smile. They were all still quietly staring at him. A guy in the back was now standing to get a better look.
And to answer your question,
he turned his attention up to Cron.
I was crawling over corruption to retrieve a washed-up net so that asshole Soul would sell me the fish.
The guards looked at each other with mixed expressions, and Cron folded his arms across his chest. A few heartbeats later, Demi reappeared from behind the curtain and quickly walked out among the tables. She held out her hand, and a plate of steaming fried fish materialized between her fingers. With practiced speed, she placed down a meal before each person. The guards quietly went to their business of forking warm buttery flakes of fish into their mouths, and Demi came back to her usual spot behind the bar. Cron turned to face her and held out one of his hands.
Here, we appreciate your service,
he said, and Jack was reasonably certain Cron initiated a trade interface.
I'm sorry I have to charge you as much as I do.
She accepted his trade and looked over to Jack.
You're right, by the way. He is an arsehole. Soul believes pockets lined with coin outweighs the survival of this town.
What purpose does he serve?
Jack asked. Both Cron and Demi looked from him to each other, confused, and Jack tried to clarify the question.
Does he own the fish or something?
Demi shook her head.
Jack, the fishermen have to sell their fish to the wharfmaster. So I guess, in a way, he does own them.
She got a far-off look in her blue eyes.
After the previous wharfmaster died in an attack long ago, Saul became the new one. Now, stop asking nonsense questions for once and stand still. Let's fix up those hit points.
Demi reached out her long and slender finger and grabbed his arm. She closed her eyes, slowly inhaled, and then sung out 3 perfect ascending notes that echoed briefly in the air. A calmness washed over him, and his hit points flashed green near the edge of his peripheral vision. It incremented from 9 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 right before his eyes. Demi let go of Jack's arm and leaned against the back of the bar again. A few of the guards chewing on their fish casually looked over at the miracle Jack had just witnessed.
Thank you. That was amazing,
Jack said, grinning from ear to ear. Lex must have done something like that when he had scraped half his back off on the rocks in front of the tower. Out of the corner of his eye, Jack noticed Cron was still just staring down at him with a dour frown on his expressionless face. Demi lightly slapped the big man's armored shoulder with the back of her hand.
Oh, come on. He's odd, but not useless. He's a gift, and you know we were long overdue.
Hey now,
Jack said.
Gift might be a little over the line, but I am learning.
Embracing video game logic felt like the way to go in this strange place. These were all NPCs, not real people, right? And he was designated as a hero, after all. Jack crossed his arms, mirroring Cron's imposing stance.
I will go into the tower and find the rarest of items to feed to this town. I will help push the vile corruption back.
One of Cron's black eyebrows arched and vanished under his helmet. Jack realized he might have overreached his acting ability. The big man let out a huge sigh.
All right, let's get over to the yard.
Kron said. He nodded to Demi and then turned back to Jack.
I'll see what you can do. Follow me.
Jack followed the heavily armored man out of the inn and up a dirt path headed directly away from the tower and the vast ocean behind it. The giant man's protective gear made squeaking noises as his heavy plate mail boots impacted the ground.
Tell me what you know of the tower.
Kron's voice boomed as he walked in front of Jack, never looking back.
Not much. Garl told me it has monsters and treasure. I know Lex goes in every day, alone. I believe.
Kron looked over his shoulder at Jack. After a few paces, he returned his gaze to the path before him.
Everyone enters Blackmoor Cove through the front gates. I watched those gates, and I did not see you enter. There are those who believe that arriving from the tower instead of through the gate foretells the end of this town.
Jack had a vision of people with torches and pitchforks coming to burn him at the stake.
I haven't decided if I trust you, but I am an honest man.
He stopped and turned to face Jack.
You help this town, and you and I will be fine. Anything else, and I will toss you in the endless sea.
Kron's face was unnervingly calm. Jack looked up to meet the man's rigid gaze.
Look, I'm an honest man too. I'm not from here. I don't know how I got here, and I will do what it takes to get out of here. Helping to push this corruption crap back seems like a good place to start.
Kron furrowed his brow but nodded.
That will do for now. Let's go.
Where are we going again?
The yard. There we can test your abilities without consequences.
What consequences?
Don't attack anyone in town, and you won't ever need to know.
As their feet ate up more path, they traveled through rolling, lush hills and eventually came to the top of a considerable rise. It was a good vantage point from which to view the surrounding area. Ahead, he could see a clear, flat field with the remains of a stone brick wall. The fortification was punctured with an archway, and the path they traveled led directly through that archway, but the wall's abbreviated length made the opening seem pointless. Piles of broken stone poking out of the tall grass indicated where the rest of the wall had stood at some point long ago. Jack could barely see tiny figures standing on top, looking out toward the snow-capped mountains that rose far in the distance. Off to his right was a lush forest with a tall, leafy canopy that blocked the light from reaching its relatively barren, shadowed floor. Glimpses of sparkling sunlight from deeper in between the trees caught his eye, and he noticed a wide river twisting and turning its way to the sea. Jack turned all the way around before they walked over the small hill to find the tower easily visible behind them, looking as if it were a thread attaching the sky to the ground. The dark stretch of water Kron called the endless sea continued beyond until it met the horizon. Between the cobalt sky, the orange sun, and the lush, verdant grass, everything was so overly vibrant and alien. Jack shook his head and caught up with Kron as he trudged along in his armor up the path. It was about 15 minutes of walking from the inn to the wall, and it was even less impressive when Jack got up close. Maybe 2 stories high and 30 yards long. He counted 2 guards on the walls and 3 more in the grass below, practicing with swords. Jack instantly recognized the old man watching over the 2 sparring in the center. Even from behind, he could tell it was the gray-bearded, angry warrior who terrified him the other night, Lex's father. When he saw Kron walking up with Jack behind, Herrick walked to intercept them.
"Why'd you bring this fool up here?"
he asked Kron.
"Kicking him out the gate, are ya?" "Clear the yard,"
was all the horned man replied. Herrick slowly gave him a half-smile and then turned to the man and woman trying to whack each other with wooden swords inside a roped-off area. The woman was younger and seemed a bit overweight for armed combat. The other was an older man who was tall and spindly and could barely lift his sword. Herrick put his fingers in his mouth and made a high-pitched whistle.
That's enough, you two. Stop wasting everyone's time and get out of there.
Both looked relieved to be able to stop their awkward dance and walked over to sit on a nearby wooden bench. The heavily armored man that escorted Jack to the wall stepped over the rope and entered the sparring area. Jack didn't wait to be told what to do and followed Kron, facing him from the other side. As soon as he stepped across the threshold, another icon appeared in his peripheral vision. This time it was a blue sword on a yellow square. Focusing on the image opened a larger info panel. Sparring yard. No negative effects from attacking heroes or townsfolk. HP will not drop below 1. HP and MP lost within sparring yard will be restored on exit. Cannot be dispelled. Power is wasted without control. Jack wondered what would have happened if he had successfully activated his double strike ability on Lex the night before.
Draw your sword,
Kron commanded in his low, rumbling voice, then materialized a massive 8-foot shield that covered him from horns to toe. It was like he had ripped an ornate iron door off a church somewhere. Jack took a deep breath and pulled his sword out of the leather scabbard tied around his hip. This was probably going to hurt, but the new guy had to prove himself before they would take him seriously.
Hey, where did he get that?
Lex's father yelled from outside the yard. Jack looked over and gave Herrick an awkward flourish of his weapon to show it off. It had been a mistake to take his eyes off the deadly serious horned man across from him, though. Jack got a close look at Kron's massive shield an instant before it struck him. The slab of iron connected with the entire right side of Jack's body and sent him sliding to the edge of the sparring yard. His head rung as his eyes flicked to the hit point display floating at the corner of his vision. HP 1 out of 10. Jack pushed off the ground and got to his feet, shaking off the hit. Herrick was laughing at him, but he resisted taking his eyes from the horned man across the dusty arena. Kron was fast, way faster than should physically be possible in all that plate armor.
Obviously, the first lesson is, don't let down your guard,
Kron said behind his shield a few steps away.
Now, attack!
Jack had played enough video games to know he was never going to physically beat Kron. He pictured himself running over with his rusty sword, looking like a fool, poking at that enormous hunk of metal Kron used as a shield. No, he was going to try something else. Without really thinking about how to do it, Jack thrust his sword out at Kron and tried to activate his mining laser ability. A brilliant red ray immediately burst from the tip of his sword right at Kron. The beam passed through the thick shield as if it wasn't there and engulfed the heavily armored man in flames. Kron became a bonfire. Maybe it was the frustration of the last 24 hours, but without realizing it, Jack channeled all his mana into the attack. The big man wanted to see what he could do. Why waste time? After his mana depleted, he took a step back, feeling a significant mental drain. Jack was forced to brace his free hand on his knee as he caught his breath, but kept his eye on his opponent. Kron remained crouched behind his shield, his head down until the flames died out. The horned man didn't move, and Jack had a moment to think he had seriously hurt him. But that line of thought ended quickly when a deep, chuckling laughter came from Kron. Confused, Jack looked around and saw that everyone was staring at him. Herrick quickly bent down and snatched up his dropped pipe off the ground, his head snapping back up to catch Jack looking at him. He must have let it fall out of his mouth. Kron clattered over to Jack and sheathed his massive sword. Jack did the same.
What in the depths was that?
Kron asked, his wide mouth grinning and full of teeth for once.
One of my abilities. Mining laser.
Jack responded, feeling a little proud of himself.
Herrick, my old friend,
Kron called out to the old bearded man, tapping dirt out of his pipe.
You ever see something like that?
Lex's father didn't answer, and Kron turned his eyes back on Jack.
A channeled spell out of a rusty iron sword, right past all my armor. Jack, save that for the floor boss until you know what the hell you are doing. Understood?
There was a gleam in Kron's eye that reminded him of what he saw from Lex that first night in the cabin. Hope. He didn't know what floor boss meant exactly, but Jack gave a firm nod anyway. Maybe he was right in assuming he could get out after playing this game to its end. Kron turned and headed over to a chest sitting on the dirt by the wall. He paused for a moment and then beckoned for Jack to leave the training area. As he stepped over the threshold, Jack's hit points and mana returned to full. When he drew close, a trade menu appeared. Kron held him with his steely gaze.
You'll need one of these if you want to make it out with any items from the first floor. Tell me the best one you can equip.
Jack heard Herrick snort with indignation behind him and almost turned to ask the old man what his problem was. Instead, he let it go and focused on the trade panel hovering in front of his eyes. Trade offered, Kron, simple leather harness, chest, value 3, defense 3, linked chain vest, chest, value 3, defense 4, iron breastplate, chest, value 3, defense 5. Jack moved his hand over all the items in the trade window, but only the simple leather harness didn't have a prohibitive red glow around it. He let Kron know.
Seems like there is a bit of a trade-off there,
Kron mused.
Not really a tank, then?
You're talking about combat roles, aren't you?
Jack asked. He felt like more things were clicking into place. His thoughts turned again to the tower and what secrets awaited him inside.
Yes, and you seem to be a damage dealer,
Kron said, approval in his deep voice as he removed the heavy and chain armor from the trade window. Jack confirmed his side of the trade.
Seems so. Thank you for the armor. I'll pay you back when I get some cash. Coin.
He opened his inventory and equipped his new armor. Leather straps appeared in a cross on his chest with a few around his abdomen. His white cotton shirt automatically popped into a second decorative chest slot and remained equipped. The belt attached to his mysterious scabbard had automatically adjusted to fit over the new armor as well. Jack gave his new leather harness a yank and had to admit he did feel slightly better protected, as if he had just put on a seatbelt. And it looked like it, too.
Can I go in now? The tower?
Jack turned and pointed to the thin line attached to the sky in the distance. Herrick walked up to them and shook his head.
No, you fool! You can't go in today. It's too late.
The old man readjusted the pipe with a chomp between his crooked yellowed teeth and walked past them to lean against a shadowed part of the wall. Kron shot a glance over his shoulder at Herrick and then turned his stern eyes back to Jack.
One fancy magic beam alone won't be enough to finish a floor.
He raised a huge log of an arm and motioned to the brown-haired woman sitting on the wooden bench by the wall who had been training before they walked up.
Raya, get over here and spar with our new hero for a bit.
She stiffened, her eyes growing wide.
No combat skills. Just melee attacks,
Kron added, beckoning her over again. She slowly picked up her wooden sword and shield and waddled more than ran up to them. Kron pointed an armored finger, indicating that Jack should join her in the sparring yard.
She hits, you defend.
Jack studied the woman as he stepped over the rope and back into the small square arena. Her sword and shield were held limply at the ends of her long arms dangling at her sides. She had on what looked like brown corduroy overalls covering her thick legs and wide hips, and a bright yellow blouse. Raya's big brown eyes darted from Jack to Kron and back, her ponytail slapping back and forth like a cow's tail swatting flies. She had a slightly doughy, freckled face. Kron suddenly bellowed from behind him in a startlingly commanding voice.
Now, Raya, hit him as hard as you can!
She blinked once and then rushed Jack. Chapter 8. A few hours passed while sparring with Raya, and Jack came to the realization that she was a lot stronger than he had first thought. She plowed into him a few times with her round wooden shield after he reacted too slowly. It wasn't anywhere near as damaging as Kron's epic shield bashing, but Jack felt it all the same. After some practice with the long shaft of iron held in his hand, he was deflecting most of her attacks. As Jack parried the last 3 stabs from Raya's sword, Kron called out from the top of the wall where he had been standing watch.
Okay, you two, enough!
Jack backed up a few steps and put his sword in his leather sheath. Raya brought her wooden sword up to her brow and used the back of her hand to wipe a sweaty strand of errant hair out of her face. She was visibly winded. He became aware of the fact that he didn't feel tired at all. The guards eating lunch at the inn earlier had returned to the wall, and a few of them kept one eye on the awkward sparring match. Jack noticed Herrick sitting on the ground, his back propped up against a rain barrel. His pipe was resting in his lap, and he seemed to be asleep. Kron walked up to them.
Nice work, Raya. You tapped him a few times.
Thanks, Kron.
She nodded.
Yeah, thanks.
Jack gave his sparring opponent a smile.
That really helped me out a lot.
Hey, no problem there.
She waved the shield still attached to her wrist and walked out of the sparring area.
Jack,
Kron began.
why don't you head back to the inn and wait for Lex to come out? It's nearly time.
The horned man squinted as he looked towards the tall forest of pine trees in the distance, and Jack noticed that a light mist had started to gather in the growing shadows. Kron continued.
She has been running the first few floors every day for years. Ask her your questions about the tower. Now that you are armed and armored, I'm sure she'll be able to take you more seriously.
Thanks? Hey, why don't you go in with her? You seem like you could take it or dish it out pretty good.
Kron looked down at Jack, his normally emotionless face clouding over like a summer storm.
I would, Jack, but we've already lost too many.
He waved a massive arm over the few men and women standing watch over the fields beyond the crumbling stone brick wall.
These people are townsfolk. Some have a degree of aptitude, and some just don't. If both Lex and I were locked in the tower, there would be no heroes in town for 7 hours. A single wave of demons would wipe out everyone quickly.
Kron shook his head and straightened, regaining his normal composure. He looked back out over the forest like he was looking at something very far away.
And if she remained in the town to help me protect these people, the corruption would creep even closer.
Kron sighed and turned back to Jack. Looking into his dark eyes, Jack saw a brief glimpse of a man shuddering under the weight of all that plate armor.
You and Lex have a lot of work ahead. Now go.
Jack nodded.
Thanks, Kron. I won't let you down.
As Jack turned to leave, he saw a group of townsfolk guards were heading back on the path toward town. He noticed Raya was one of them and jogged a bit to catch up with her.
Hey!
Jack said to catch her attention.
Oh, hi.
Her thick ponytail flipped around behind her head as she turned to look at him.
Raya, it's nice to meet you. I'm Jack. I'm new here.
I see that you are. You aren't supposed to be here. It's so crazy to see another hero arrive at our town level.
She smiled a big, toothy grin.
Oh, and it's great to meet you too, Jack. Lex told me all about you. So, I gotta know.
She reached out and put her hand on his arm.
You really don't know anything?
Her eyebrows arched up near the top of her forehead as she waited for him to answer. Jack winced.
I'm learning. Hey, you hit pretty dang hard back there. Are you training to become a guard?
I'm training to be just above useless.
She grew serious.
I know I'm not fit to be a real guard. Just not built for it. I used to work the stable at the inn, but there ain't no stable anymore, as I'm sure you saw. It was okay. Kept me in meat pies. Oh, I miss meat pies.
Why no meat pies?
Fish. All there is fish and seaweed,
she said, a small snarl appearing on her lips. She looked over at Jack.
You'll see. Soon enough.
Okay.
Jack didn't know what to say to that, so they walked in silence for a bit. Raya's feet clomped heavily on the well-worn trail when she walked, as if perpetually surprised that the ground was as close as it was. His own fished-up boots were still remarkably free of dirt, considering all the activity today. Then something that Kron had told him bubbled up to the front of his mind.
Raya, speaking of me not knowing things, why did Kron say people were locked in the tower for 7 hours?
She looked over at him again as a lopsided grin reappeared on her freckled face.
You poor thing,
she said, her face seeming more excited than feeling pity.
The tower always returns the climbers at the same time, every evening, at exit. 1 floor 50. They always pop out just in time for dinner.
Wow, so time flows at a different rate inside the tower? How long does it take to clear a floor?
It really depends on how strong you are, I guess. Lex would know more about that.
Jack thought about what she had said for a moment as they walked along the soft dirt path.
So, there must be a time limit, a window for entry. Someone couldn't just go in right before the exit time, to cheat the system and only be gone a minute. Right?
Ho-ho! Maybe this tree will bear fruit after all. Yeah, be inside by late morning, or the door won't open till the next day.
Raya, all this vague, late-morning, dinner-time stuff, how do you tell what time it really is? Do I just...
Jack tried to open an interface that told him the time. One of the familiar black lacquered panels appeared before him. On the left was etched a red-painted icon of a door with a red X below it. On the right was a counter that read 3 minutes and 14 seconds, and it was counting down.
Never mind. I think I answered my own question,
Jack said as they approached the square stone building that was the inn.
You want to come wait by the fountain with me?
Raya asked, stopping in the crossroad, pointing a thumb over her shoulder at the tower rising into the sky behind her.
Sure. I'd love to see how this works.
Raya took a moment to exchange mundane pleasantries with some of the townsfolk who had walked from the gate with them and then waved for Jack to follow her toward the tower. As they approached the grand structure, Jack felt a mix of excitement and fear stir inside of him. Below it all, he felt this barely perceptible drive to go in there. When they got closer, he examined the simplistic fountain positioned directly in front of the tower that he had only seen from a distance before. It consisted of a simple stone disc with a hole in the center. Water barely burbled out from the hole, like a drinking fountain with no pressure. The stone disc sat in a moat of sorts, surrounded by a knee-high, rough stone wall. There was just enough water leaking out to evenly coat the top of the disc, and it ran down the sides in drips, landing in the mossy base of the fountain. But he couldn't find where the water emptied. The whole thing looked hundreds of years old. He followed her around the fountain to the side that faced the tower, and Jack noticed a wooden chest resting up against the outer wall of the ancient stone fountain.
You walked out of this door, huh? In the middle of the night?
Raya asked, pointing at the iron-banded wooden door at the base of the tower. Jack took a few steps toward the door and inspected it closely. It resembled a classic arched wooden door he had seen in fantasy art or in games. An iron ring was bolted to the right side, and iron hinges on the left attached it to the tower. The door didn't look particularly strong or even all that well made. Jack turned back to face the doughy woman in overalls.
More like tossed out. I was naked, bleeding, and freezing when Lex found me. And healed me. It was a good thing she was out in the rain last night, I guess.
She spends a lot of nights out here, waiting.
Raya responded. There was a note of sadness in her normally boisterous tone. Jack was about to ask her for more information about Lex when a ball of blue light began to glow off to his left. The ball quickly expanded into a shape of a woman, and the shining figure blazed so bright that Jack had to shield his eyes with his hand. Then it was gone, and in its place stood Lex. She took the scene in around her and noticed the two of them standing by the fountain. He took a step toward Lex, his new boots displacing a few smooth pebbles that covered the area. He put his hands on his hips, thrusting out his chest so she couldn't miss the leather armor and sword that was now in his scabbard.
So, that's how you dismount a mystical tower full of loot and monsters. I see my mistake now.
He smirked at the shorter blonde woman in black leather armor. Lex looked Jack up and down, one eyebrow raising as she did.
And I see you have some upgrades.
Raya chimed in behind him.
Yeah, I gave him some lumps in the yard. He needs a lot of work, though.
Lex walked over to the chest by the fountain Jack had noticed a moment ago.
Oh, yeah?
She asked, holding her hand out over it. She seemed to be concentrating on something, and Jack realized she must be accessing some menu only she could see. A slight wind coming off the sea blew a shock of perfectly straight golden hair forward as she looked down at the chest. Jack heard the water dripping in the fountain slowly rise in volume. He took a few steps closer and noticed that the water was bubbling up just half an inch or so higher than before.
How quickly did Kron knock him on his arse?
Lex asked, absent-mindedly running 2 fingers behind her ear, tucking the errant hair back in its place. Jack got a good look at the small, pointed ear through her shoulder-length hair. He had only seen normal ears so far and wondered what her deal was. It struck him for the first time that Lex might be an elf, or a half-elf, if there were such creatures here. He'd have to find a way to ask about that. Raya gave Lex a big grin.
Gotta be record time, truly. To be honest though, Lex, this here hero Jack has a serious ray of flames in his tool belt.
The cheerful woman gave Lex an exaggerated wink. Jack crossed his arms over the leather straps on his chest.
Yeah, and I can't wait till tomorrow when I can use it to help fill this box with treasure from the tower.
Lex pulled her hand back and locked her golden eyes on Jack. A smile appeared on her stunning face, and in that moment, it felt like the warmth of the sun spilling through parting clouds on a chilly autumn day.
Seems like you are adjusting pretty well, Jack,
Lex said.
Thanks goes to Demi for this sword.
He indicated the weapon at his hip.
Garl for some fishy boots, to Kron, and even Raya.
He looked over to the wide, freckled woman.
There are a lot of pretty great people here.
Lex was beaming. Her eyes flicked over to Raya, and they exchanged an assortment of nonverbal communications he couldn't clearly decipher, but was pretty sure it was about him. Uncomfortable, Jack broke the silence.
So, how was your day in the tower?
The same,
She said, the light in her eyes dimming a little.
Come on, let's get some food. I did get a little extra coin today. Dinner is on me.
She gave him a half-smile, spun on her heel, and took a step toward the eye of the storm. Jack and Raya followed Lex first around the fountain and then onto the path that led to the crossroads in the center of town. Jack could see a few townsfolk walking the dirt path up from the fishing wharf, the setting orange sun casting long shadows in front of them. Jack pulled up the interface showing the door timer. The arrow was pointing down and away from the door icon, and both were white now. To the right, the countdown read 6 hours, 57 minutes, and 23 seconds. He wondered what happened in 7 hours, but it seemed like the door probably opened again after the countdown. When they got close to the inn, he could smell burning wood and smoked fish. Jack entered behind Lex and Raya and followed them to a table. About a dozen people were sitting at the tables, all talking to each other, but most of the conversation turned to quiet murmurs when Jack walked in. He did his best to ignore them. Jack swung his leg over the bench and took a seat across from the two women, just as Demi approached them.
Kron can be a bit stubborn, but your new armor means he thinks you are a worthy investment.
The tall proprietor said, smiling down on him.
Thanks again for all your help. I'm practically itching to get into that tower and get some loot.
Jack responded with a grin. Now that he thought about it, he did feel an unnaturally strong urge to get into that tower. The fact that none of this was real and his body was trapped in an underground spaceship came rushing to the front of his mind again, and it startled him. His smile faltered, but no one seemed to notice.
I was worried when I brought him in, but I'm glad you were able to straighten him out,
Lex said, looking up at Demi.
Hey, I'm the one that did all the hammering.
Raya said, and then massaged her right shoulder with one of her oversized hands. Lex held out her hand, palm up.
Demi, here. This is for our 3 meals and for 2 rooms tonight,
She said, and then looked him in the eye.
Jack has a big day tomorrow. He'll need all the help he can get.
Demi tapped a finger in the air and nodded.
I'll be back soon.
The silver-haired woman turned and walked back toward the kitchen.
Aw, thanks, Lex. But you really didn't need to buy my supper.
Raya said.
Yeah, thanks.
Jack added.
I owe you one. I owe everyone one. But what was that about a room here tonight? What about the cabin I was in last night?
Raya and Lex shared a glance. Raya began to grin, a wild look alight in her eyes, but Lex looked slightly concerned. The taller, freckled woman let out a short, obnoxious chuckle when she saw Lex's face.
Aw, he'll be fine. Don't worry.
Jack,
Lex said.
do you know what rest bonus is?
Before Jack could answer, Demi was back with their food. Placed before him was the same plate of grilled fish he had earlier in the day. Then she produced 3 wooden bowls filled with some sort of soup and placed them down. Lastly, she placed 3 wooden cups filled with water in front of them.
Breakfast is at 2 to close. Try not to keep him up all night.
Demi looked at Lex with a raised eyebrow and then glided back behind the curtain at the back of the bar. Raya wasted no time spooning soup into her mouth. Jack smelled the steam coming off the piping broth under his nose, and he thought it might be a kind of seaweed broth. But then a small tentacle floated to the surface. It was dark red and coiled, covered with tiny suction cups. He looked up at Lex to find her golden eyes studying him.
I don't know what a rest bonus is specifically, but I think I have the general idea. I have no idea what 2 to close means, though. And I don't even want to know what the soup is all about.
Jack looked down into the questionable broth as he stirred it with his wooden spoon. The door to the inn opened again, and Jack turned to look. More townsfolk were walking in and sitting at benches around the inn. He noticed familiar faces among them. Bushy-browed Garl and gangly Wyben walked in. Jack waved and Garl nodded. It seemed like everyone from the town came to eat at the same time. Then an idea struck him. Everyone must be following the timer for the tower. It probably switched states throughout the day, exiting in the evening, closing late morning, and open at midnight? He looked up at Lex quietly eating her fish. He took his spoon and dipped it in to catch some of the broth around the spiraling tentacle. Without looking up, he spoke.
I think a rest bonus must be a kind of stat boost for meeting some specific conditions before going into the tower. And it probably wears off. Ah.
He quickly stuck the spoon in his face, like ripping off a Band-Aid. It was surprisingly good, salty and very savory. Jack's mouth immediately wanted more. He dipped his spoon back in and continued.
I may have just worked out what 2 to close means. Maybe that breakfast is served 2 hours before the door in the tower closes for the day?
He looked up from his soup to find Lex and Raya were watching him.
I'm still working on that one. And this soup.
He interrupted himself by shoving the spoon in his mouth again, upending its hot contents onto his tongue. After a moment, he swallowed the delicious broth.
It's amazing.
Chapter 9. As they ate, Jack told them about the day's adventures. Lex seemed very interested in the part about the old rusty sword joining with the scabbard. Jack thought it was a good idea to leave out the booming voice that only he heard. Then the conversation turned to Blackmoor gossip. Jack learned that the girl in the dress he had seen in the boat was Soul's daughter, Haley. She was always running away and hiding, and most people thought that it was dangerous for the girl to be wandering off on her own. Eventually, Raya said it was getting late and time for Lex and Jack to talk business. She thanked Lex and left to go and continue gossip with other townsfolk sitting at the bar.
So,
Jack started awkwardly.
What's it like in there, really? I need to know what to expect.
She took a moment to consider.
It's different every time. Sometimes the floor is beautiful. Mostly, it's a nightmare. Your first time tomorrow? You'll want to stop after the first boss. But don't feel like you have to finish the first floor on your first time. And the moment you lose half your health, run. Run as fast as you can for an exit orb.
Exit orb?
You'll see. You start next to one, and there is another in the boss chamber. Touch it, and you exit.
How many floors do you clear per day?
I can reliably defeat the floor 5 boss. I could probably do another few floors, but I don't dare take the risk of advancing only to have to turn back.
She looked at her hands in her lap.
Losing a whole day would be disastrous.
Why would turning back lose you a whole day?
He asked. He was glad she was finally answering his questions without judgment.
Well, okay.
She let out a long breath and continued.
Every floor has a boss monster to find and defeat. If you do, you will be presented with a door and a gold chest. You'll want to loot the chest. It usually has a few valuable items. Then you must decide. You can touch the orb and leave with the items you gained, or risk it all by walking through the door to the next floor up. Because if you are on a floor with an undefeated boss and you touch an orb, you exit the tower carrying only what you had before you entered.
Ah, so you lose all your loot and the whole day would be wasted. That would mean the corruption would come closer, right?
Lex gave him a weak smile.
Yes. I'm very glad you are understanding the situation you are in. We are all in. I would be one day behind with no real way to make it up.
Her eyes unfocused before she continued.
I've tried to force Kron to make a run once or twice, just to give us some breathing room, but he's too stubborn. And also, he's right. If something were to happen while we were both inside...
Hey,
Jack said, and her golden eyes snapped to his.
I'm not as beefy as Kron, but I will do what I can to help you out, Lex.
He pounded his fist against the leather strap on his chest and earned another smile.
What a silly word for a person. Beefy?
Lex tried out her new word, her smile reaching her large eyes. Jack started to laugh at the beautifully petite woman sitting across from him, repeating the word beefy to herself.
Beefy!
Jack hit her with it again, using his deepest voice and flexing his biceps. The moment he heard the woman laugh, it was all over. It was becoming undeniably clear to Jack that he found her irresistible.
Lex, you keep talking like I have to do this alone. Why don't we go in together?
The brightness instantly left her eyes again, and the corners of her mouth slowly relaxed back to a resting position on her face. He stammered, trying to take it back once he saw her reaction.
Or not. It's okay.
Jack, it will be a challenge for you just to survive the first floor, much less follow me higher.
Hey, no problem,
he said, waving the topic away.
So, how do I get stronger? I don't seem to have experience points, but I do have a level.
Equip better items,
she said, shrugging.
Higher floors have better ones. Your hero level reflects the highest point you've opened in a tower. Defeat floor boss 1, and you become a level 2 hero, and so on.
Jack's brow furrowed.
Does a hero level serve any other purpose than high score?
Lex bent her forehead to her hand and looked deep into the grains of the table.
I have to keep reminding myself that you don't know anything about this world.
She sat back and crossed her arms over the simple green tunic she had changed into, and he could tell that she thought he was going to die in there, with how little he knew. She took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and continued.
You can only equip items from the highest floor you've opened. It's why I can't just hand you a higher value weapon. Speaking of which, make sure you look for all the chests hidden on a floor. Wandering monsters can also drop items when you destroy them. Take all the time you need, and be thorough, because you could use the upgrades. And as you should know by now, the goal is to bring as many items back to town as possible. Inventory space is limited, so you might eventually have to choose to leave behind some lower value ones, but you won't run into that issue for a while.
Jack quickly opened his inventory menu again. He knew he had seen something. Free slots, minus 2,147,483,648 out of 16. He didn't quite know how to interpret this. It might mean he had space for 16 items, billions, or none. Wouldn't that be funny? He could go in but never carry anything out.
Wait, that can't be right.
He mumbled to himself.
What can't be right?
Lex asked, tilting her head suspiciously. Jack had an idea how to test this. He split the display between his character interface and his inventory. He looked at his fished-up boots and moved them from the equipment slot to the empty inventory. Then he checked again. Free slots, minus 2,147,483,647 out of 16. The negative number incremented toward 0 by 1. Could he really hold over 2 billion items?
What is it?
Lex said, leaning forward. Jack quickly focused on his boots and moved them back into his foot equipment slot.
Well, let's just say I think you don't know how right you are about not having to worry about inventory space for a while.
Lex just furrowed her dark eyebrows. He didn't want to get into it until he knew for sure.
Anyway, how long does it normally take to clear a floor?
That depends on your skill, the layout, your equipment, the monsters, the floor boss. It's an infinite twisting mess in there. I can usually clear whatever floor 1 throws at me in about 10 minutes. Floor 5 can take 2 hours, maybe more. I don't really know. You lose all sense of time in there.
I heard you always come out at the same time. Exit time, I guess it's called, right?
Yes, Jack.
She nodded.
You could find yourself outmatched in 10 minutes and reaching for an exit orb. You'll still come out 7 hours later in the real world.
The real world.
Jack looked down and moved his hand over the rough surface of the table, his fingers tracing the wood grain. Everything in this virtual world felt real. He wondered what was happening to his real body outside this simulation or whatever it was. There were still so many unanswered questions, and it was entirely possible that he was dying in the real world. He made a fist, let it fall to the table, and looked up at the experienced hero sitting across from him.
How do we win, Lex?
Win what?
Is the goal to get to the top of the tower? Will that push back the corruption for good?
The goal is to survive, Jack. As far as I know, the corruption has always existed and will always exist. The town holds the power to push it back, but that power only goes so far. I've been told there are places in the vast world other than Blackmoor Cove, though I've never seen them.
Her voice grew quiet as she continued.
I've heard tales of towns that sprawl for miles across the land, with hundreds of climbing parties, pouring in enormous amounts of items, raising the town level to near utopian heights. And tales of yet others that have failed, their entire population either wiped out or fled. With no one filling a town with any items from the tower, the surrounding corruption will advance until it reaches the tower itself. When that happens, it is said they are converted into dark towers. The stories say that the corruption feeds off the tower, becoming a focal point of pure sorrow. The area will spawn powerful monsters to guard the tower, and legions more to spread across the land. No one has ever retaken a dark tower that I know of.
A sense of hopelessness washed over Jack. He was trying to convince himself that the only thing he could really do was play along for now when Lex started to sing softly.
It comes to take us away. We fight the night to keep it at bay.
Her voice was slow, deep, and full of mourning. It was the most beautiful thing Jack had ever heard. The song rose in volume as she continued.
Fountain and tower, chest and town, this is our home, we plant our roots down.
Jack was mesmerized. The air around them seemed to glow as the beautiful blonde in front of him continued to sing.
Weapons and armor, life and death, this is our home, till our dying breath. We climb to take it away. We fight the night, and here we will stay. Now come, and stomp out the blight. Now run, you demons of night.
Everyone in the inn had stopped to listen. When she finished, they began murmuring words of appreciation and pounding their cups on the tables. Jack felt charged up. He suddenly wanted nothing more than to plunge his sword into monsters for a chance at some valuable loot. He noticed a new status icon in the corner of his vision. It was a red music note on a white square. He focused on it to bring up a description. Inspired, +2 damage, +2 magic power, +5 HP, immune to fear effects, 14 minutes and 57 seconds. Now go and take what's yours.
That was amazing.
Thank you. Demi has been giving me lessons to be a better singer.
I think you should stop wasting your time,
Jack said with a smirk.
What? Why?
She started, her dark eyebrows crashing down, but Jack held up his hand, cutting her off.
Because I honestly can't imagine anything better than what I just heard. I mean, that was literally magical,
he said. She searched his face for any hint of mockery, and then let out a deep breath. Lex pushed off the table and stood up.
Time for bed, Jack. Big day tomorrow,
she said, looking down at him. He nodded and stood, taking a moment to check the tower timer display. 2 hours and 19 minutes. The white arrow was still pointing downward, away from the white door. It was still exit time, and he guessed the icon would change in just over 2 hours. But he put that puzzle away as he followed Lex up to the bar. Lex waved to get Demi's attention.
Thanks for the meal. Going to head to our rooms.
If I don't see ya, good luck tomorrow, Jack.
Raya waved and called out in a loud voice. Jack heard a,
"Hear, hear!"
from behind and turned to see one of the townsfolk guards who had watched him train earlier. Others around the inn added bits of encouragement too. He waved a hand to everyone, a big smile on his face as he followed Lex up the stairs to the left of the bar. The stairs took them to a small hallway with 2 doors. Lex opened the one on the left and motioned for Jack to enter. He walked past her and entered the small room. There was a straw bed, a chest of drawers, a table, and a chair. It was cramped, but looked cozy enough. Lex crossed her arms and leaned in the doorframe.
Meet me downstairs by 2 hours to close. I'll go over some of the important things again before we go in.
Jack nodded in response.
Sleep well, Jack.
Sweet dreams, Lex.
She smiled and went across the hall to her own room. Their eyes met as she shut the door. Jack went over and closed his own door, then sat down on his bed and tried to think through everything again. He pulled off his boots and set them at the foot of the bed. Jack attempted to take off his armor the same way and was having a hard time when he remembered he should really be using menus to do this. He picked up his boots and deposited them right into his inventory, then unequipped everything but his cotton pants, sword, and scabbard. He tried again to mentally force the leather belt from his main hand slot, but was unable to do so. The information panel he had seen before reappeared. You cannot remove this item. Please increase complexity S% parenthesis null parenthesis for more options.
Well, that's gonna suck,
he said to himself, hoping he didn't stab himself with his new rusty sword while he slept. He lay down and put his hands behind his head. He was warm and full, and he knew sleep would be coming for him soon. Then a stray thought hit him, and he sat bolt upright in his bed. Usually he would go to the bathroom and relieve himself so he didn't have to wake in the middle of the night to deal with waste that wanted out. Jack realized that he hadn't needed to do so, not once since arriving. Taken by a sudden panic, he rechecked his crotch area. The first time he really looked was when he just regained consciousness, sitting in front of 2 strangers and out of his mind with everything that had happened. He removed the cloth pants, and after a thorough reinvestigation, it seemed like everything was there. He was anatomically correct. More importantly, everything seemed to feel like it was supposed to. Jack pressed his head back into his feather-stuffed pillow as he tossed more questions on top of the towering, unanswered pile in his mind.